I mean, everybody loves that. So like every novel is about the rural landscapes, or like New York City or something. And like for a while there, that's just like all they are is like regions. And I guess that's back pre-internet, before every region became like almost identical to everything else. Like back when, like, if you went to Mississippi, like you couldn't understand what anybody was saying because of the accents and shit. So, I mean, that happened to me once in Tennessee. I was like stopping at a gas station and I was asking for like $60 on this one pump. I was like, yeah, 60 on this, and then she was like, "You saying 60 or 16?" And I'm just like, 60, and she just looked at me like, and I was like 60. Like that's how I had to communicate it, like,
Yeah.
because of my fucking accent.
Rip up some Nicorette before it starts. So I don't expect this will be an especially long one.
It could be if we go off, but
I mean, how much can we possibly say?
I could say a lot about this
I
one.
mean,
Dude.
did you listen to any of her reading
No.
or like her audiobook? Where she just reads it exactly like she sings, but she reads it like this in her little whisper voice.
Yeah, I think
It's exactly how she sounds.
that's the thing, is everybody. I know there's like a fan base that really likes her, but I've never been a huge fan.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I know. I mean, it's gonna sound bad me saying this, but I don't mean it in a bad way. Like, it's mostly women and gay men that love Lana Del Rey, right? Like, so it makes sense that I don't like. It doesn't really hit me in that sweet spot like it does women and gay men. But
She's okay, but a lot of it is like, I don't know. I get sick of her style really quickly.
that was me, because I did listen to that one album, and I tried to go back and listen to a few of the albums before we started this, just because I'm like, I don't want to write this off and be like mean, because clearly there's a huge audience for this, but I can't do it. Yeah, like the whisper singing, the please daddy,
Yeah,
kind of style, I just can't deal with.
not.
Not for me. Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like that old school, like Billie Holiday style ripoff or whatever, like, but like more modern. So, and like worse, because she's just like whispering it and not actually singing like the notes.
So romantic.
Fuck.
I find her to be kind of painfully romantic sometimes. Like sometimes it's good, sometimes it's just like, all right, too much.
Yeah, and we'll get into this, and I want to get into the aesthetic and all that too. Like, just, I really had a hard time with this. And like I said, listeners, I texted Sophie about this, and I was like, look, I don't want to just beat this up, because it would be so easy to just beat this up as like, look how shitty it is. I would like to try and do that, although there's going to be a lot of beating up. I would like to try and make it a little bit more constructive than just Sophie and I just being like, fuck this.
Yeah,
Although
I
we
feel
will
kind
be
of
doing
bad.
that.
She does get beat up a lot, I feel like.
She does. She gets attacked online, but that's just because of today's dynamics, dude. Like, if you're a famous person, the internet's going to beat you up, like, no matter what. Like, if you're just a certain level of fame, you're going to get haters all the time. It's just what it is. Because I know she gets a lot of shit too. It's a really weird fan base. I don't know, but they're all gonna hate us for this, so we're gonna get some hate too, I guess.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
You're good.
Yeah, I'm good.
This is Heavy Bored. I'm Andrew Whitstop,
I'm bored.
and today we're doing Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass by Lana Del Rey. Lana Del Rey, Lana. Whatever. And this one was published by Simon and Schuster. Simon and Schuster published this one, and I'm trying to get the fucking title page, but I think it was put out in 2020 here. Yeah, it's on the back here. Simon and Schuster, they put it out in 2020. I don't know if she composed this over the pandemic or what, but it seems like a dumb little pandemic project.
Yeah. Oh, I take it back. I'm not bored. I'm just tired.
Yeah. Sometimes there's not much difference between the two.
Yeah.
And so we had the same version of this. I have the hardcover. Soph, you read online version, you said?
Yeah, I read the ebook. The hard copy is like $21.
Yeah, and I paid that, unfortunately, but
I looked for it used and it wasn't dropping enough for me to justify buying it. So I was like, yeah, I'm not spending that on this particular book.
yeah, I dropped the $20, listeners, to buy it, and
Well, keep in mind also a lot of the pages are like her photography.
yeah, calling it photography is generous, but yeah, like it's like, yeah, I regret spending the $20. This is one of the few books I probably regret owning. This and the trees. Although, yeah, well, but I'm now an owner of this, so I have the copy. We'll link it in the description as always. Ooh, before we get started, housekeeping before I forget. We are still looking for workshop horror stories. If you have a workshop horror story you want to share with us, please send that to heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. For those that don't know, we also have a subscription plan. You can subscribe at patreon.com/heavyboard to receive full, uncensored episodes for subscribers only, bonus content, extras, all that good stuff. Check it out. If you can't afford that, don't want to do that, there are other ways you can support us. You can subscribe, share, like any of our YouTube channels. That helps us out. You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple or anywhere else you get your podcasts. That helps us out. It's a free way to support us. We appreciate it. And of course, everything we cover is going to be linked in the description. And I think that's it. Heavy board. All right. Where do you want to start with this? Should we just do like a celebrity poetry kind of preamble?
If you want to, I mean, what other celebrities do we have? I mean, the only one that immediately comes to mind is James Franco.
Franco, I actually own his book too, but like, just for listeners that don't know, maybe some of you that listen to this probably do know if you're a book person, like, you know, celebrities, musicians for a while have always been putting out these kind of little like sad collections of mediocre poems or just straight up bad poetry. Jim Morrison might have been the most prominent, like in the 60s, right? You know, like his poetry is notoriously very kind of bad and stupid, and you know, most of that is the case for all these celebrity books. But we all know this, right? So celebrity puts out some poetry, they feel like they're in the mood, or they feel like all of a sudden that because they're a celebrity they can write poetry, and this is just the latest example. So I guess, I mean, we could have picked any celebrity poetry book, but Sophie and I wanted to do this one because it's the most recent kind of big celebrity collection that came out, and, you know, all that kind of thing. But why do celebrities think they can write poetry?
I mean, I think everyone thinks that they could, right? Well, I mean, there are people who think it's like beyond them. But I think, you know, there's something about poetry that can feel like, even if it's not necessarily the most accessible from a reader perspective, it can be accessible for writing. You know, like I feel like everyone sort of can write shitty poems.
Yeah, and I think it has to do with the kind of the romanticizing, particularly in the 20th century here, where we, you know, Sophie and I have railed against this often, where people are saying things like poetry is a pile of dirt, right? Poetry is like a grain of sand, or like these stupid, things that aren't describing anything, and they just kind of put it down to the lowest common denominator, and it's bad usually.
Well, it's also arguably easier a lot, like to produce a lot of it takes a lot less time than to produce a lot of nonfiction or produce a lot of fiction or something else. Like, you don't have to have a complete story to write a book of poems.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, particularly celebrities or people that aren't educated in this, like freaks like we are, where we've wasted our life studying this art form nobody gives a shit about. It's I guess there's a freedom to it, and there's just kind of this misunderstanding that any collection of pretty words or philosophical phrasings are poetry, and
Yeah, there's a lot of that in here.
yeah,
I see
and it's all celebrity poetry. Like, that's a lot of celebrity poetry, is because they don't quite understand. They like it. They don't really know why they like it, kind of thing. I don't know. I don't want to get into like her headspace or anything, because that's like
Yeah.
I don't want to psychoanalyze. I think that's not as helpful as people claim it is. But
No, I'm not gonna be a bitch about this. Decided that coming in here. I'm not gonna be a bitch.
well, because if we're a bitch, it would just come off really mean, and we don't want
Or
it
I'm
to
gonna
be.
actively try not to be.
Yeah, I think we still will. Like, I'll bitch once we
Oh,
start
I'll
getting into
definitely,
this.
I
Yeah,
definitely still will.
I will. I have a few
But it's the
notes.
decision not to be.
Yeah, we're consciously trying not to be listeners. So when you hear us slip into it,
I went to a party, came in hot, made decisions beforehand. My mind made up.
fuck me, daddy.
Yeah.
Fuck me, daddy, please. Yeah, okay. I'm already getting me with the fuck me daddies. All right. All right, so this is what it is. Listeners know this is celebrity poetry. I think this is going to be a fun time. We're going to have a fun time with this. All right, first things first. Let's dedication. What do you think? What do we think of this dedication?
It loses me at worn, warm hands.
What?
It lost me at worn, warm hands.
Yeah.
Dedicated to whomever's warm afternoon hands. I'm sorry, afternoon hands. Come upon these pages, wherever you may find them, and that you may remember that the world is conspiring for you and to act in a manner as such.
So dedicated to everybody. She's an every man's poet. Who knew, right? Lana Del Rey's lifestyle is just everybody's. Yeah. Dedicated to whomever's worn. Yeah. What do we think?
I don't know. I don't love it. I mean, like, it's nice on some level. Like, I get it, you know? I feel like there are a lot of dedications out there like this, but I do wish, like, I like the second part of it. I like the ending of it. I wish that we came into it a little bit differently. I don't know. I'm being nitpicky.
I think it kind of sums up this entire book, is just kind of how bland, and I think this is what a lot of people think art is, this kind of never-ending universal expression or something, and for whoever, whenever, and it's just, I think that's just a misunderstanding. It's kind of an elementary understanding of art, and particularly this very old art called poetry. But yeah, I think it just kind of sums it up. And for listeners that don't have, I have the hard copy. I don't know if you could tell on yours, so, but it appears that most of these are pictures or images of typewritten pages, like old school typewriter
Yeah, I mean,
pages.
I can't really see that, but it does look like a typewriter text.
Yeah, and I think she specifically said she did this on a typewriter. Again, people for some reason, I know a lot of writers that do this. I'm sure you did too, Soph, and MFA and stuff, where like they romanticize this dead technology as if it like makes you a better writer or something. Nobody
Nope,
did in your
never did.
program.
Oh, no, people
Okay.
did. I did not.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Never
like,
felt that way.
there were people I knew that like collected these shitty dead technology, like these heavy, shitty old
I mean,
things
they
that
can
don't
be
work
cool.
anymore.
Like, they can be interesting to look at. I'm
I
sure
could
it would
see
be
some of
fun to
them.
like type on it for a minute, I think I'd probably get sick of it really quickly.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that on this, and I don't know if Sophie, you can see it on your version with the digital pages, but you can see how like you can tell that like the lines are crooked on the page because of how you load the paper into an old machine like that.
Yeah, no, you can't tell in the digital copy.
Yeah, like some of the lines are just not straight across, and this is something that you would see in a lot of typewritten pages if you go back and look at old typewriter pages like this. But you know, it's because there was no auto aligning and things like that, so you had to align it yourself, and you know, it just ended up that way, like a little crooked here and there. But yeah, and I don't know if that's because of the pages, like how the paper was loaded into the machine, or because of how they photocopied these pages to like kind of make it into, you know, a PDF that they could print and bind in a book. But there's that too, listeners. So you get and I mean, this was, look, I'm gonna like when we were in undergrad, this was like a trend, right? Typewriters and people doing typewriter poems. And this coincides with Instagram poetry. This coincides.
I see a lot of this on Instagram. I see a
Right.
lot of it on Instagram.
And it's this kind of pretend that if you
Like
use
these
this
little tiny 3-line
yeah,
typewritten
printed page, yeah.
poems that are just like 3 lines long. They're not really poems yet. They're just like a single sentence that's saying something that your teenage self thought was like poetic, but isn't.
Yeah.
I
And
see a lot.
yeah, and I think teenage is a good description here. It's very juvenile usually. Again, because it's assuming that this dead technology adds anything to your work, because it doesn't, right? You might like the aesthetic of it. Like Sophie said, it's cool to look at on somebody's shelf at a house party, cocktail
I mean, I can
party.
understand why it can be useful in that it forces you to like go back and start typing it over. Like, you know, you can't just go back and hit delete.
Right.
So I can see why for drafting, some people might rely on it that way to act as a kind of, I will always do the next draft. But
It's incredible that people romanticize this. Like, I know, you know, George R. Martin has this dumb thing where he only writes on this like 1990s word processor, and you have to like special order shit for it because it's such dead technology. And I'm just like, I get superstitions, I get that, I get rituals, I get that. Like, yeah, I use those things too, but I'm just like, if you're going to insist that this dead technology is adding something to your work, like, you know, you're lying. Like, it's fake. It's not real. All right. Like, the tool is one thing, and I get people don't want to have to learn to use a new tool, but like, as if a word processor on a modern computer is so much different than a fucking typewriter. Like, it's objectively better. Like, it's objectively better. You can delete, you can highlight, you can change. Like, it is so much better and faster and less maintenance. And I just don't understand. I mean, why is that? I mean, why do we think that this, like, these typewriters are romanticized? I have no idea. I could guess.
I mean, I think they just like some people associate it with some other era of writers where I don't know, maybe they can like think of famous writers and they have like, you know, it just makes me think like people who really loved Midnight in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like it's those people, like people
Yeah.
who sort of fantasize about the writing world in that way.
Right.
Or like I should have lived in a different time.
I
I'm an
should have
old
lived in a
soul.
time where it was much harder to type up your manuscript because typewriters are just so romantic. Like, yeah. And I get it. Okay, the clacking, you get to hear the progress, right? You can hear it. The famous photos of, dude, like every writer hunched over the typewriter and cigarette hanging out of their mouth or whatever, like the kind of famous photos from that part
Yeah, I
of the,
really think that's all it
yeah.
is for the most part.
And this is a good example. The reason I wanted to talk about it is because I think this is a good example of people like not really understanding what they're doing, but thinking that this aesthetic, being just in this kind of ether of an aesthetic, makes art. And there is some truth to that, right? Sure. But like, I just, this is a good example of this book uses that aesthetic to make its own art, and it fails. You know, like, it's not doing that. It's relying on this stupid little romanticized notion of typewriters and things like that, and coffee stains on manuscripts. There's some of that put into this. And
It's authentic.
yeah, it's this very performative, I think, performing what a poet should be. And it's almost, I mean, really, it's insulting. Like, like I was, I texted Sophie about this. I was embarrassed for Lana, like reading this, like as, oh, you put this out, like you thought this was really good. Like,
I mean, dude, you know how many people probably love this?
I'm sure a lot of people love this, but I can't. I'm not one of them, and I'm not somebody that could just blow smoke up it or pretend that those people that love this know what they're talking about, you know, because they don't. They love it because they love her, not because they love the art or the poetry or
Or
even
they
what's being
love like
said.
the idea of whatever the thing she loves. Like, I don't know. I feel like she loves the idea of LA and like, I don't know. We'll get into all of that,
I
but
don't know enough about her, and I guess fans can correct us and stuff. But I mean, wasn't she like somebody's daughter, like a famous person's daughter? Isn't that how she got her start?
damn, I don't know.
Because it's not like she was like a great singer and somebody saw her in a club in LA and was like, you should record an album. Like, you know, I think she was just somebody's like daughter. And I mean, this happens all the time. People get mad at nepotism, but I mean, nepotism's a part of life, okay? You know? And clearly she's doing something right. She sells a lot of albums. People like her
Oh, I was
stuff.
so
But,
into the whole Nepo babies thing.
oh, the most recent, that New Yorker piece or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even read the piece, but I was just like, yeah, I'll get into this for a minute. I'll look them all up.
You know, we talked about this. I mean, the Nepo, people are mad at nepotism just because they're jealous because they think they deserve it and this person doesn't. And maybe they're right, but, you know, that's just a part of life. So there's always going to be nepotism. There's always going to be Nepo babies being put in places that don't deserve
We
it.
have yet to determine
What are you looking up?
um her father was a copywriter and her mother was an account executive at Grey Group.
So I thought wrong then.
Yeah, I don't think she actually is.
But it's like that very kind of like, you know, people that know this already know that, but her music's kind of like that Nora Jones kind of stoner girl music. Like, it's basically what it is.
Yeah, but it has a very, very specific, I don't know.
Yeah, but without singing. Yeah, like Nora Jones would actually sing. Yeah, it's like Elliott Smith with like his whisper, like his whispering
Yeah.
singing. That's like really intense whispering. It's like like a raspy whisper because you're trying to whisper really loudly, but you can't. And even, dude, like when I turn to the title page and it says "Violent Bent Backwards Over the Grass" with these weird capital letters in typewriting print, I was just cringing, dude. I was cringing from page one. I was cringing from the little, like, you know, the dedication. I was cringing from her little blurb here in the pocket of the book, where she says, "Violent Bent Backwards Over the Grass" is the title of the poem of the book and the first poem I wrote of many, some of which came to me in their entirety. Yeah, it seems like it, yeah. Which I dictated and then typed out. So she dictated these into like a little, sure, her cell phone, her iPhone, and then typed out on her little typewriter. And some that I worked laboriously picking apart each word to make the perfect poem. They are eclectic and honest and not trying to be anything other than what they are, and for that reason I'm proud of them, especially because the spirit in which they were written was very authentic. Authentic.
I didn't even read that.
Authenticity. It's part of the book jacket in mine, so it might not be in the digital version. With these dumb kind of 1940s space photo. Yeah. Yeah, dude. The photos, and this is like a picture book
Look
too.
at my double oven.
Yeah, and this is like a picture book. Like that's part of the reason I think it's so childish too. I call it's a collage. This is a collage of aesthetic that she likes, and it's not really art. It's not really if it is art, it's not a successful art piece. It's just kind of a collage of whatever the fuck she was feeling at the time. And like she said, like in this blurb, like they're honest, they're eclectic, and they aren't not trying to be anything other than what they are. And I'm just like, they are though, right? Like they're trying to be profound. Yeah, which is what
What,
all
you mean her
poetry.
1950s to 60s Americana photographs, or are we on to her poems?
Well, both, all of it.
I mean, yeah, I I kind of get the honest thing, but that's because at some points I do feel like I'm just kind of reading her journal,
Yeah, and
you
I think
know?
that's a good description. Yeah, the journal. This
And
is
that can happen
just
like mid-poem. And like there are places where I think and I was talking about this earlier, where she like hit something that could have been interesting to explore but was not pursued in a way that interests me, if that makes sense.
yeah.
But then there are like just other things that page one, I mean, well, I guess
Do you have
page
page
six.
numbers on yours?
Yeah. I
I
mean,
have.
it's the first poem. It's
Yeah,
just
I
the
have
first word
no
that
page numbers, which I thought was strange. It's just, again, I know that's deliberate. I'm sure that's deliberate. If this was
it has to
published
be
by
deliberate.
Simon and Schuster and they don't include page numbers, it's because she didn't want them or whatever. And it just furthers my thing that this is a hodgepodge kind of collage of, smudged iPhone lens photos from like her phone, and she thought it was really cool and edgy or grungy. This kind of, like you said, 1960s kind of hippie where they would take pictures of trash and like the industrial parks, and that became part of an artistic aesthetic. And I
But
think
like
this
with
is
this sort of fuzzy, slightly out of focus,
right.
uh, kind of like sort of dreamy feeling to it. Like everything is like there can be a lot of neutral tones and then like pops of color, but they're all kind of blurry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like just, I mean, these blurry dandelions in this field of grass, for example. Um,
Yeah. And the images are out of focus, right? So they're out of focus in
yeah,
yours too.
yeah, I mean that's totally on purpose. It's like
Yeah. This kind of smudged iPhone lens that
but it's not
everybody.
even that. There's like an artist who like first did this, who did this by accident because he was like, you know, sent Polaroid film. Like I was talking to my friend about this. She was explaining it to me. Like this guy who like first sort of came up with this aesthetic, but it was by accident. He was like a painter, and he started taking Polaroid photos because they were just like, here, do something with this.
Yeah.
And so he took them, but there was something wrong with his film because there had been just something wrong with it. I guess like in transit from one place to another or something or whatever.
Right.
And he just loved it. Like, because it came up with these like out of focus, sort of blurry landscapes that just like looked like blotches of color.
And Lana, like part of her aesthetic, it seems to be obsessed with this kind of mid-century, like that one album, Norman fucking Rockwell, right? Like she has the Norman Rockwell paintings, kind of references the kind of Americana, that weird kind of mid-century aesthetic that everybody knows that we've kind of not grown out of. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? But yeah, you want to talk about this first poem, the title poem?
I mean, the only thing I was going to say about it was like, just to use it as an example of like where she'll use capital I and then just shift to a lowercase I, and I'm like, not really sure what this is supposed to be doing here.
Yeah, I don't think she knows either, dude. Like they're honest.
It's just
It's
honest.
just how I felt. I definitely didn't want to do the work to correct it. It was honest. Yeah. So the first one, and like Sophie said, the title poem. This is the one we kind of been teasing the whole time because it's like the one
I
that's
went
like,
to a party.
yeah,
Made decisions beforehand. My mind made up things that would make me happy. To do them or not. Each option weighed quietly. A plan for each thought. But then I walked through the door past the open concept and saw Violet bent backwards over the grass. Yeah, I mean, do we need more than that?
yeah. 7 years old with dandelions grasped.
Tightly in her hands, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, and we have a little bit of rhyme here. Sorry, I feel like my blah, blah, blah wasn't very nice.
Dude, it is
I'm sorry.
okay. This is
Sorry,
again.
Lana. I'll be a little bit of a Lana Del Rey apologist.
It's elementary school metaphors. It's elementary school rhymes. It is not understanding anything about what poetry is beyond this kind of aesthetic. Like I said, this just feels like some type of like aesthetic collage that she wanted to put together. I kept texting Sophie. I was like, "This is childish. This is a 35-year-old child that thinks this is what art is, or this is what poetry is." And I couldn't not stop thinking that from this poem on. Like this first poem, I cringed, dude. Like I cringed right away, and I was just like, I texted Sophie, and I was like, Jesus, what did we do to ourselves?
There's just something
Like,
about
what did
this
we do?
brand of like Americana and like melancholy
Yeah.
and just romance. I don't know. It's just the blend of it that there's something about it that I don't like.
It's childish. But I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's vague. It's ridiculous. It's, clearly not paid attention to
Well,
in any
I just
regard.
hate that story. That like old Hollywood glamour girl, like melancholic glamorous like lady kind of. But I'm
Like
sad.
taking amphetamine pills to stay thin or whatever.
Yeah, like whatever. Yeah, it just screams. I mean, the whole thing just feels very 1950s in places. I see a lot of Allen Ginsberg in here. I see a lot of Sylvia Plath in here. I
It's,
don't know that either is done very well.
I mean, it's not done well. Yeah, like it's,
Uh,
dude, it's everybody, because those are the two, right? We talked about this on the Ginsberg episode. Listeners can go back
there's
and listen to
Whitman
this.
here.
What are the books that people read that don't know anything about poetry but like art? How by Allen Ginsberg, Plath. Those are the two, right? People get
Ariel.
into Plath. Yeah. So
But
these,
specifically the two big poems, right?
yeah,
People like Daddy and people like Lady Lazarus.
and those are what you read in, high school. Those are what you read in just a basic kind of American Western English
And
curriculum.
those poems all fuck. They're great.
And they are great, yeah. So I understand why people are attracted to them, and because of what Plath was doing, because of what Ginsberg was doing, right? They were changing the game a little bit in their books that they were putting out at that time, and it just, like Sophie said, there are direct line references to a lot of this too, and it's just, a child's understanding of it. It's somebody that read it, thought it was cool, and then thought they could do that too. Is the vibe I get. I like.
Yeah, I mean, there are also just so many words in here that scream cut me.
Oh, we'll get to her editing that she thought was really good because she wanted to display it on this book for everybody.
But also there are moments like even in her first poem that like references Sylvia Plath, which I guess is maybe the second poem.
Bare feet on linoleum. Yeah, stay
Yeah,
on your
or do you
path.
want to say anything about the first poem? So it's Violet bent backwards over the grass, which we know. Wasn't that taken from Ginsberg? Did we?
I don't know.
I feel like I looked this up, but I think it was like a line taken from somewhere.
Probably because it's one of the better kind of, and it's one of the alliterative lines. One of the more sound conscious lines, so it would make sense if she took it from somebody and it wasn't original, because it's actually one of the more like, pays attention to the alliteration, pays attention to the sound and the rhythm of everything and the words and how it's formed. Bare feet on linoleum with her oven. I believe these are, I don't know the brand of this oven, dude. This fucking blurry iPhone photo. But I'm pretty sure this type of oven is like a $15,000 oven.
The book landed at number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Oh, well,
Just
as
saying.
everybody knows, the New York Times bestseller list, if you don't know it, is bullshit. Which is a shame because it never used to be, but it's a pay-to-play thing. And if you get into any of these things, if you pay the New York Times to put your book on that list, or your publisher does, because it helps sell books. So some of these books that get on the New York Times bestseller list have literally sold less than 1,000 copies, but the publisher paid for it to be on the list, so it's on the list. So is it really a bestseller? No, it's basically just kind of like, the stamp of approval from the consensus tastemakers. And of course, because she's famous, that's why I kept asking myself, like, why did Simon and Schuster put this out? Because she's famous
Because
enough,
it would
like,
sell.
yeah, because she's famous enough that it would sell copies, and that's really all they care about. there isn't some like group that cares about poetry. There's a few foundations like Poetry Foundation, and like even they don't even really give a shit about poetry anymore. So there's that. Did you want to talk about this bare feet on linoleum or?
Yeah, but hang
Yeah,
on.
go for it. Because I was interested in that emoji one, the next poem, with a fucking emoji
Oh,
in it.
we'll talk about that, dude. I
Yeah.
think I just highlighted that and said no.
Yeah.
There were a lot of moments where I just said no or yes in my notes. So I kept it pretty brief. Um, yeah, I don't see any. I feel like I fucking know. Like I looked this up a long time ago. Someone fucking look this up and find it for me, please. I know we have like, what, like 4 listeners, so that's great.
We need a little
Awesome.
audience
Do a
participation
little
in
work.
this. Yeah, audience participation.
Help me figure out where this came from. If it came from somewhere, if Violet bent backwards over the grass came from either Ginsberg or Whitman somewhere. I feel like maybe it did, but maybe I made that up. Entirely possible. Anyway, don't want to be too distracted by that. Sorry, it was pulling me out a little bit. Pull Skype back up. Yeah, so hang on, I'm back to the first poem. This is the one. Okay, this isn't the one where she ends with the ending of this poem. She's waiting for fireworks to begin. Or no, she's watching this little girl waiting for fireworks to begin. Or so we assume from the imagery, right?
Bare feet.
No, I mean in the first one.
Oh, the first
Just
poem.
and that one ends, and in that moment I decided to do nothing about everything forever. I feel like there are a lot of moments like this, and I would say this is something that everyone did when they started writing poems for the first time, is that you maybe had a lot more single word stanzas or lines than were needed, or there can be something kind of cringy about it, I think, having that big space between the end of that stanza to do nothing about everything, I think would have been a stronger ending in and of itself. But then to have forever
Way
its
at the
own
bottom of the
stanza.
page.
I like it. We think that, I think often we have this sense that it adds this power. And it does. It draws your eye to it. Like there's a reason why
Right.
if you put a line on its own or a single word on its own in a poem, it's going to draw your eye to it. You're going to assume that it's important for some reason, or there's some emphasis there. This is like the last word of this poem. So this is just like an example of what I would say is like, yeah, it's definitely what I would say is like honest. I think there is something that's kind of like unpretentious about her writing, which I will praise.
It's what the kind of a person that doesn't like poetry or understand poetry could be drawn to. So yeah, I see what you're saying with that.
Yeah,
you can pick up
but
on
it
it.
also
Yeah.
isn't like trying too hard. Like that was one thing. I know that we talked about this a little bit, but like reading James Franco, there was something there that felt more pretentious to me.
Well, because he went through an MFA, he went through, he became close with Frank Bedart. Frank Bedart, the reason he got
And
published
still
with,
is not really a writer,
yeah,
right?
and
I mean, as far as we know, like, maybe he writes screenplays, etc. But
honestly, I don't think Franco is a bad director. Like, I don't think
Nick,
he's a bad director. I don't think he's a bad actor. I think he needs to be in the right role. He's not like a very versatile or like great actor, but I
these are
think
all
he's
talented people we're talking about
right.
today. Just for so
Poetry,
we're all clear.
but I think you're making a good point, is because like the unpretentiousness is what the kind of people that don't understand poetry can glom off of, because they get turned off by more pretentious work.
Yeah.
But like it's this idea that like poetry is considered that it could be anything, that it could be a pile of dirt, that it could be a stone in a pond or whatever. This idea that it's been romanticized to oblivion, and this is what I always rail against on this podcast, and the reason I say we need to take it more seriously, because it lets people that are maybe very good at one thing think that they can also do this thing, right? And I know we live in a world where everybody believes that they're a political expert, they believe that they're a fucking foreign relations expert every time something trends online. But, it just, really gets under my skin when people think they can do this and then we praise it as if it's like breakthrough or genius. And
Well, that's the thing, though, that I mean, there are so many things that, like, there are so many shapes that it can take, right? Like, you don't have to be a master of form, like received forms is not something that you have to master before being a published poet.
sure,
You do not have to have read all of the, hottest contemporary poets, nor do you have to have read like all of the sort of foundational poets, whatever that means to you. You don't
sure.
have to have really read poetry to write a poem, you know. I and that I'm sure we could argue about and blah 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 blah. But like
Well,
you
we
could sort
talked
of
about this. Yeah,
explain, like I mean, I think even I sort of say
anybody
that, but I
could. Yeah,
yeah, you could have some sense of like what rhyming is, for example. Like I'm sure
right.
we all did that in kindergarten at some point, whether or not you remember. It's like why, we tell nursery rhymes to children. Yes, there's more like formal qualities there. Um,
Well, I
but
think
I do
yeah,
think that in that way, while poetry as a form of literature might be viewed as one of the least accessible forms of literature, like one of the least accessible genres of literature, very often, not always. Um, I think it's also the most accessible from a writing perspective,
well, it's the
if that
same
makes sense.
thing. Yeah, like we've talked about this on a couple of the craft episodes we've done. Listeners can go back and look at those, or
I mean,
Bloom.
I think was like interested in writing poetry before I became interested in reading poetry like every other asshole. Not
Right.
every other asshole. There were all the people that came before us that were like great. And like I mean, I also like hear about people that really did have um childhoods that were filled with poetry because their parents were poetry readers or
Well, yeah, and we've said this before. Like, yeah, almost anybody can write something that we call a poem or resemble a poem, but it doesn't make it good. Like that's the
and I
difference.
think
Is
with
yeah,
something like a story, when you like, have to fill the page from, the West Coast to the East Coast, it's like not, it's easier to tell when it's bad. There is so much you can be missing from a short story that is so easy to pick up on. There is so much more you have to, be aware of when you're writing a novel. There are so many more things that your readers are going to be like, what the fuck if you didn't include something or if it doesn't go anywhere, right? So I think from a writing perspective, poetry offers in some way the least pressure to make something that feels, I don't want to say like the least pressure to make something that feels complete or like finalized, but it kind of does, right? Because also even like authors will publish books of poems and continue to work on them later.
yeah. But I just mean
Uh,
in terms of yeah, she doesn't understand that clearly. I think this is clearly just the base level, and
and there
like
is
I
also a history of like songwriters who also write poetry, and often we kind of look at them and go, meh,
cringe.
like
Yeah,
yeah,
and
that's there.
there's a line here too because we haven't really talked about this much on this podcast, but the kind of line between song lyrics and poetry. There is a line that divides the two. They're not the same thing, although there is relation.
Well, we've
There's
talked about this,
yeah,
haven't we talked about this with like spoken word
yeah,
versus
of
like,
course,
the written
yeah,
page? Like there is a certain formula to spoken word. It's meant to be accessible as a performance. It is not necessarily as entertaining on the page, like in the absence of that
right,
performance, and you know, written poetry that's intended to be read, right? Intended to be heard, we would say, to some,
yeah, sounded,
however you fucking want to say it. I don't care. Um, God, there was something that Jonathan Culler kept saying that I want to, some fucking word that I kept getting really annoyed at.
the
I can't think
enunciative
of it.
apparatus,
Yeah, there it is.
enunciative
Enunciative
apparatus.
apparatus. Um, yeah, however you want to use your apparatus to enunciate.
Yeah, stick your apparatus
Yeah.
somewhere, and
I mean, I guess it's not your enunciative apparatus, it's the enunciative apparatus of the poem.
yeah.
Um,
But there is this line between songwriting
there
and
is,
yeah,
and I think it's very similar to that of anything that is like performance versus something that's intended to be read.
And I've heard a
right?
lot of
Is that
my
it like there's an expectation of performance. It is intended to go with these other elements to create a whole thing, right? It
and I
also doesn't have to be. I think there's something in lyrics that can allow for more cheesiness, right? Because you
yeah,
also have these other things. You have
you forgive the cheesiness because the lyrics are one aspect of a song. Yeah.
yeah, because maybe, just it sounds great.
Yeah, or
And
it
that's
really
okay.
works
The
with
sound
like,
does
yeah,
come first. It tends to come first in
right.
music in a way that while poetry really emphasizes sound, it can't be entirely and exclusively reliant on it.
And and I like good lyricists. Sophie and I have talked about this. I'm not a big Dylan fan, but a lot of people like Dylan's lyrics, and I think Dylan writes good lyric. He has good lyrics in a lot of his songs. I'm not a huge fan of his stuff, but like, Dylan is another one. They gave him a fucking prize for poetry, dude. Like they said that Dylan writing lyrics was the same as writing poems, and that still gets under my skin. Listeners have heard me
Yeah, I mean,
rant
I
about
think
it.
didn't it like famously get under his too? Like I
I,
didn't he continuously say that he was not a poet?
Yeah, but he was very strange, and I think he gets a
He
lot
was
of
also,
credit
yeah.
for being that kind of strange. Like people pretend that like being strange or being like an asshole is also artistic, and sometimes it is. But like, you know, for him, I think when he won that prize too, he was just kind of like, what, like. And I know I've seen interviews with him during that kind of Dylan revival, and they made that movie and stuff, and like, he always famously said he hated the word poet, like kind of thing. I don't like the word poet, blah, blah, blah. And, he just fucked with people, basically. It's the
Yeah.
reason that Dylan always pissed me off in interviews is because in the 60s, there was this aesthetic that, like, fuck everything kind of aesthetic, and, like, everything's a joke. And that just, that's just not my personality. I can't stand that. I don't think everything's a joke. I take things that I like very seriously, like, kind of, But, yeah, we're way off topic. We're not way off topic. We're right on topic with the book like this. But do you want to hit Bare Feet on a Linoleum, or do you want to keep
I
going?
meant to. And it's
Because
like,
it is the first Plath mentioned, so did you want to talk about that?
I mean, yeah, well, I'd be curious to know what you thought, first of all.
I mean, I thought everything in this was pretty awful, but yeah, stay on your path, Sylvia Plath. Don't fall away like all the others. Don't take all your secrets alone to your watery grave about lovers and mother. Watery
Hmm.
grave.
Yeah, okay, so you hit it on the head.
Yeah.
Watery grave was what I really, really, it was the thing that instantly screamed to me. I was like, no, I was like, hold up, did she drown?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, not that that like matters that much. It's just like, why say watery grave here? So like, oh, she was sad, so it's watery. She was crying.
Yeah. And I think
Uh,
that's, again, it's an example of not understanding what imagery is. But then you do have the picture of the oven. I get she's trying to make the connection of, okay, how did Plath kill herself? Well, she put her head in a gas oven, right?
yeah, but I don't think it was a watery one.
No, it
So
wasn't. Yeah.
I think that has a specific context.
Yeah.
Not that like it, she does talk about like being on a boat at some point. And there is this thing about like the glamour of some of these poems, like I'm on a boat to Catalina for no reason. I'm like, shut
Right.
up.
Right. Because she's a millionaire songwriter. So,
Don't
like,
show me this
she's
picture of your double fucking oven. like,
6 burner, your like $20,000 French oven. Yeah.
like with a shitty like paper flower on top of it.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And I think that's what she's going for. She's going for the mid-century aesthetic where we put something very expensive and beautiful with something ugly like trash or fake flowers or cigarette butts or something that was a very 19 kind of 50s, 60s, mid-century modern type thing. And I think she's trying to tap into that, but I think she's just so bad at it that it comes off as cheesy. Like I said, I was embarrassed for her reading this. Like
Well, like
I
there's
know
something that
she's
comes
probably
off
not
as a little bit
embarrassed.
cheesy. There's something
Yeah.
that comes off as like slightly out of touch, but also I don't think in touch is like what we're going for here if you're really in that like LA,
Right.
Hollywood, like fame, melancholia kind of
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, and it works. I understand because it works with her overall brand kind of thing. Although I know she wouldn't call it that, but it is kind of like a brand, right? And like I said, I have friends that I know would get pissed off at me for saying this because they love Lana, they love her shit. But
But like you can love her
yeah.
music and think that her poems kind of suck,
yeah,
you know?
just like most celebrities. Like I like the Doors, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you Jim Morrison's poetry books are good. You know.
I think Lana has good music, but like again,
See, I don't even like the music, but I
I
think
don't love her music,
I'm
you
just
know?
not
Like
the
I don't
audience. Yeah, I'm not the audience for it.
I just
Cause
don't think she quite uses like I want more range. Like I
yeah,
mean that sounds like shitty. She's obviously very talented and very beautiful, like great voice. It's just like, yeah, it's not. It's just the all quiet all the time. You know, it's like Coldplay, but for a different kind of girl.
yeah. But anyway, I've moved on now.
Yeah, there were just a lot of places where even like the rhyme was like a little too loud and then sort of falls away, or where the rhyme is just a little too loud all the way through the poem, where it's not even like so incredibly egregious. It's just like, oh, you know, you could have really fine-tuned this and like you could have eliminated this one instance of this rhyme and it would have kept the rhythm. And I have an example of this somewhere where I just like took exchanged a word. And I was like, yeah, this still, you know, it like it when you have too heavy of a rhyme, sometimes it feels like it's hitting you over the head with it.
But the
You know,
thing is I
like it
don't think
gets
she understands it. Like I don't think she understands rhyme. Like I don't
well,
think
I think what happens is like, you know, you read someone like Sylvia Plath and you are also like, you know, understandably a songwriter, right? There is a lot of need for rhyme in songs. Um,
and if not rhyme then rhythm.
yeah, so like she has some understanding of those things. And also like if you know,
Right.
read Ariel by Sylvia Plath, you're going to, you know, be hit with the heavy, um, you know, internal rhymes and the rhythm of something like Daddy. Um, but it's just more masterfully done by Plath.
Yeah,
And
because
here it feels like it's just not quite refined. Again, I think the content is like unpretentious, and that is, I'm not like trying to use that as a stand-in word for like dumb, you know? Like when I say unpretentious, I just mean
juvenile.
it doesn't like, you know, it doesn't feel like it's trying really hard to be a certain kind of, you know, poetry, right? You can like sort of tell her obvious influences like yes, Ginsberg, yes, Sylvia Plath, yes, Walt Whitman. Those are all really obvious, and if you're an American writer, you are probably in some way, whether you know it or not, influenced by those things.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you're a poet.
Well, the thing is that like I don't think this was done with like a lot of sweat and tears and blood. I think this was done as like a hodgepodge. "Ah, I'm bored," kind of like collage of bullshit with these kind of
Yeah.
vague connections, and
Um,
that's really why. So like the rhyme being inconsistent, like I didn't expect it to be consistent, dude. But like
No, neither do I. And it doesn't have to
it's
be necessarily, but when in the same poem, sometimes it's like, whoa, that's a really heavy rhyme to shift out of it for the entire rest of this,
right,
like,
yeah.
you know, several page long poem.
And she doesn't understand that aspect of it. And like I said, look, I like songwriters. I like good lyricists. You know, listeners, I don't think I've ever gone into it. I love Modest Mouse, one of my favorite bands. And part of why I like them is because Isaac Brock, I think, is a great lyricist. But he doesn't try to put out books of poetry, right? Like, he understands he's writing song lyrics and he's very well read. And even the name Modest Mouse is from a Virginia Woolf book. He likes to read and all that, clearly, even though he's a high school dropout. And I'm a big Modest Mouse fan, so I know all this shit. But, you know, he's not trying to put out a book of poetry and claiming that it's up there with Ginsberg and Plath and all these other things. And not that she's claiming that, but, like, you know, when you're using that as, like, I can participate in this just like they did, and sure you can, but you know, most of the time, a book like this would not get published unless you were Lana Del Rey. Like, they would not get published because it's garbage. But all right, let's move on to the emoji because we've talked enough about.
Yeah, I just see also references to Daddy all throughout this poem.
What's her whole aesthetic, right? Like I said, like the whisper, "fuck me, daddy" kind of.
There's also like I mean, but just like weird, well, not even quite like that, just like because she told the townspeople I was crazy and the lies, they started to believe them, you know. That just, you know, the villain. There's a stake in your fat black heart, and the villagers never liked you. They're dancing and stamping on you. So even just small things like that. Then, of course, after Sylvia Plath's poem, we get the of an image again. Wait, did we get that again, or was that
No,
just the
it's
first
just
instance?
next to it.
God,
Each
that's the
poem is
tough thing,
yeah,
dude. That's the fucking tough thing about having uh, a, an ebook version
right.
going back and forth. But then, there's also just that we keep getting this rhyme throughout this book that ooh, 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 ooh. And half of those rhymes are the word you.
Yeah, or the letter U, like she's
Letter
texting.
you interchangeably.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's just this poem and I've read it too many.
No, it's all of them, dude. It's all over this
Okay.
book. Yeah. It's
Like
like she starts off
I think
writing
I
out.
only read a couple
Yeah.
poems twice here.
Starts off using the word you and then just starts switching over to the letter U like she's texting on her phone. And of course, yeah.
My life is sweet like lemonade.
Because she's not a writer. So
Now there's no
that's
bitter fruit.
emoji, watermelon emoji, eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, no thought of you.
Yeah, we have you, room, choose, noon, you, Bellevue, Xanadu, through, Malibu, do, choose.
Yeah, and those are all very inconsistent. Like Sophie read off the end rhymes, but these are like some of these are single sentence stanzas, some of these are
It's like that doesn't particularly bother me. Like the overall structure itself doesn't bother me. I think the end rhymes are like whatever. You stuck to one single. It's like uncomplicated. You went with the ooh sound. It's very much like, especially right after a poem that references Sylvia Plath and has some seemingly reference to Daddy to me. I mean, I would guess,
right.
or she maybe had it in mind.
Well, again, this idea of the emoji though, this fruit emoji is what really glares at me from the
It
page
stands
here.
out. Well, it's right in the middle of the first page of the poem, right? It's called
And
What Happened When I Left You.
and it's like I've seen people try to use emojis in writing, and my thing with using emojis is okay, because they do represent things. I'm not a fan of them. I don't want to use them in writing, but I don't even use them in texting. Sophie can tell people, like, I don't use emojis. Like, I fucking hate them. And, like, this, though, is like, if you're going to put an emoji in a poem, I want it to be doing something. And this one is just like, I'm sending a text message. Here's a little fruit after the word fruit. And it's just like,
Yeah.
it's not adding anything to the poem. And this is just one example of
Well,
almost
also,
every.
it's like, how do you read it? If I'm reading this poem aloud, I mean, and like maybe we don't, I mean, you don't always like think about this, right? Because you're probably reading poems and maybe you're reading them out loud to yourself. But like you're not standing in front of a class reading them like we were, back in the day in like a workshop class or even just like a poetry class. You get to this line. Do you say, now there's no bitter fruit, watermelon emoji?
Right.
Do you say watermelon? Do you skip over it entirely? I'm not sure.
Which is, again,
And it's just like a minor, like, it's something that you just have to think about, I think. But maybe is also one of those things that we really heavily emphasize in the workshop, but only actually matters if you're routinely giving readings.
Well, the fact that it's not doing anything there besides for clearly personal aesthetic choice, which is just a
Or just
text
be like, oh, it's
message.
a fruit.
Yeah, it's a text
I
message.
said fruit and I'm including
Yeah.
fruit here.
So now,
It's
so now everybody that texts can be a poet. Like, that's literally the problem with the romanticization that I'm always railing against. Is, if you send text messages, you can write poems. It's like, well, sure, you can write poems, but they're going to be bad, right? Like, even if we agree with that, like, it's like, well, they're going to be bad, and this is just another example, not just structurally, but just like of aesthetic overall else. And I understand that. I like aesthetic. I think aesthetic's important. I just think this is a very half-baked aesthetic. This is a very, she's not even aware of what she's doing. It's a collage. It's a hodgepodge. It's a little like art project, like while she was stuck at home during the pandemic or something. I don't know. Like, but yeah. Do you want to hit the LA one, which is the most Ginsberg ripoff one, or?
Yeah, I fucking really did not like this.
Yeah. And it's very long.
This is the one that I really extra, other than the haikus, which are extra not good.
Yeah, yeah.
This was like this one, I mean, it just kept going, and it wasn't like,
It's a copy of America and like a combination of Hal, both
yeah.
Ginsberg poems, and
And that happens again elsewhere in this collection, where she writes another poem that feels very much like America.
we talked
Uh,
about this on our Ginsberg episode just because of how influential Ginsberg is. So it's one of the first books that a lot of people read if they're interested in poetry and stuff like
well, and there are
that.
a select few poems from that book too.
Yeah, and it's just you want to copy it because it is like we talked about this on our Ginsberg episode. When you read through that book, it is so energetic and like full of life that you feel inspired after reading it, like your adrenaline spikes. And I just think that's what she's trying to copy here, but she doesn't actually understand how Ginsberg achieves that in this. Like, so she just overwrites it and keeps. And I mean, she's not a poet, right? I'm not going to be like, oh, she should know better. Like I said, she can do whatever she wants. I'm just embarrassed for her that she thinks this is serious art, and people that think it's serious art. It makes me sad. It makes me kind of like, yeah, poetry really is dead, isn't it? Of course it is.
Yeah, I just felt like the title was kind of blah, which, like, no big deal, whatever. There are lines that I like, but not as part of this poem as it stands.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm from nowhere, who am I to dream is like, could be a line. It's okay. It's not the best. But in a poem that wants to use these like long listy lines like that, and to have like kind of a short assertion like that, or a short question like that, without that punctuation
Yeah.
too, which we haven't really mentioned,
There
but
is no punctuation. The punctuation is so
there is
sparse.
some, yeah, it's
Yeah.
very sparse.
And then she
It's
throws in
present
these.
when she wants to use an explanation, or an exclamation point, or if she like, there are the occasional periods after a long, like the first stanza is punctuated just once at the very end. Second stanza, not at all. Third stanza,
Yeah.
at least
Again,
two
just
instances.
more evidence that this is just, yeah, like an amateur kind of high school art project, including the photos and stuff. I mean, did you want to say anything specific about this one? Because, like I said, I was really.
No, there's just a lot of this like private jet for one, like sad rich girl aesthetic that I
Yeah.
don't, and then I never had a mother. Will you let me make the sun my own now and the ocean my son?
And this on the one section where it's LA, but she's extended it out to be like LA. It's just the way it's written is la. Like, that's
Yeah,
the way
I
it's
know.
written. La, I am who I need to. I am. Who am I to need you when I've needed so much, asked for so much, what I've been given? I'm not yet sure. I may never know what either. I may never know that either until I'm dead. And there's
Mm,
even little edits on this one too. There's like
yeah.
little whiteout section again because she's using a typewriter for aesthetic reasons and no other reason. And then there's a little bit of like a pen gone in to cross out of like one typo. And again, I want to, maybe this is a good time if we don't want to talk about this poem to move on to the edits that she put in here, the two versions of a couple poems side by side.
Which again, I thought was an error. I thought it was like an ebook error. And so I just like skipped right over it. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, well, they fucked this up.
You might as well skip over it because
Well, I
it's,
did.
yeah. And we get like these images.
Tell me what I missed, Andy.
These images, like as we move through after the LA poem here, where it's just a ripoff of America and Hal smashed together, and again a really elementary understanding of that. They have these blurry photos of the Paramount Water Tower in LA, like kind of LA landmarks, and like a shitty kind of row of houses with the big, radio tower, electrical towers in the middle of the
Yeah.
neighborhoods and stuff like that, like kind of like lower class areas, poorer areas in LA. And that other one, that's just an intersection, like a sparse, very ugly intersection.
Do you also have text that appears in like blue and stuff?
Yes, but in my
Gotcha.
version, it's copies. Like it's literally like a handwritten colored pencil is what it looks like.
Oh, it's not in
So
mine.
that one that says, "I measure time by the days I've spent away from you." That thought occurred to me as I watched the sky go dark from blue, and blue is written in blue ink.
Yeah, blue is typed in blue ink here. It's just in a slightly different font.
Yeah, because it was handwritten, and I think for the digital version they'd probably doctored it a little bit. But
There are handwritten images written
right,
in and like crossouts.
right. There's some of that, and I wanted to
Like,
get to okay, fuck the land of a thousand fires. More
yes.
shitty imagery, more shitty imagery, more shitty imagery, and let's get to never
Land,
to heaven.
yeah, I hated Land of a Thousand Fires. That's on
Yeah,
there.
yeah, dude, I hated this book. I mean, quite frankly,
Although I want to put, I know I already said this to you. I want to throw out there that like listening to it as an audiobook, because I read it, right? At some point I was like, I need to put this down, but I need to keep reading. So I found a copy of the audiobook. It was a lot easier to tolerate. Like I hated it a lot less. But
yeah,
it's because I think it works better as a piece of performance. Again, like maybe not for me, but I can see this having been for me when I was like 18,
yeah. That's the thing. I could see a young person who, again, is
right?
almost
But
entirely
like
ignorant of
again,
poetry, enjoying this and getting
better
something out
as a
of it.
performance when you have her voice reading it, when you're not just like looking at every change between you and you just the letter, like small things like that when you're not seeing like looking at the crossouts or looking at the handwritten notes. And I get some of that, right? Like we do see some of that stuff in poetry. We've seen that kind of thing from Anne Carson, except that was like a huge project and part of the aesthetic for an entire book that was not just a book of poems but also kind of an art book. And it's like kind of hot shit. Like it's
Right.
kind of um
And this is like I assume she took this like I didn't know this going into it, but then I later found out. But when I was reading it, I assumed that she took all these photos herself just because of how shitty they were and like how non-artistic they were. Like
that's
they're
what I just was assuming too,
yeah,
but I know that there is something in the back that credits someone for
they
some amount of art.
because it's mixed in with her smudged iPhone lens ones, like, and then it's mixed in with like archive photos from the 50s, 60s.
Yeah, and well, we see a lot of that. I knew that they weren't. Once we got to just images of people reading that are in black
Right.
and white, I kind of
Yeah.
knew that we weren't just looking at her pictures.
Yeah, and they're like 50s like garb and
Just
dress
like
and
people
yeah.
reading,
Yeah.
pretty much.
People I read, look at my
Pretty people
poetry.
read.
Yeah, okay. And Never to Heaven. So the way it's set up in this book, in the printed version here, listeners, is we have the original version with some edits handwritten in, and then we have the retyped version with those handwritten edits put into the poem. And I'm just going to say that there are two instances where there are added lines, and that's pretty much it. That's the extent of her working very hard on this to make them as good as they can be. And they're set off side by side here again because I think this is a look at me
Oh
kind
fuck, this is
of.
the one I just kept scrolling and I didn't realize. I made notes like, why is this the same? Did she use this line twice? And then I realized I was reading the same poem.
Twice. And I think like my question is, why do you think this is here? Why do you think she showed us like the original version and then an edited version of the same poem?
You
And, be
know,
generous. We don't have to be mean about it. But yeah, I'm thinking if I'm being as generous as possible, why would you put this here?
um, to show my thought process.
Right.
One.
And
I
she
mean,
thinks
but like
that's
I'm
yeah.
gonna like because I'm famous and people want to know what I
Right.
think. And people
Exactly.
want to know how my mind works.
And just like
Or
look at how much
if I'm
work
a
I put in.
writer, I'm hanging on to two copies of the same poem because I think there's something I'm hanging on to
Right.
in each of those.
Even
Right?
though it's
Like
the
I think
same
they're both
thing. Yeah.
good. But this one, I would say like, yeah, there's just not what has really changed, right? We have
Not much.
an addition,
Two additions.
two minor additions,
Yeah.
and one small cut.
Yeah, that's it.
It's the magic of the nowness, which is the solution to most questions. The magic of the noun.
And that's why I just
I
think I
think
was
next.
like,
I think in that one I just wrote nowness. Hate this.
and I think this
But
one, these two, there's a couple poems where she has this, where she has like an original draft and then like a very slightly, barely edited draft that she thinks is a lot better. I think this sums up the book for me, where it's like, this is the best she can do, right? Like, this is clearly the best she can do, and she thinks it's really good. And that's why she wanted to have these in here, to show us how much work she put in with this, that she took it seriously. And again, I think it's elementary. I think it is childlike. I think, like I said, I just couldn't help but be embarrassed for her as I was reading this. And I'm sure she's not embarrassed by it. I'm sure she's proud of this, but it's just, it's not there. It's laughable. And like me personally, I would not put this out under my brand, but like Sophie said, she's famous and the book would sell even if it sucked,
but
which
she has
it
faith
does.
in
So.
man in times like these.
Yeah.
Just like that's what I mean. Like there's something very accessible about that, right? Like
Yeah.
there's nothing really dissenting or not that you have to be, right? Like not that you have to be against like the status quo, like as because you're a writer or some shit.
Well, right. I
Uh,
think this is somebody's idea of what a writer would do, because if you look at archive stuff, we've talked about this. Somebody like Elizabeth Bishop, who did serious editing, there's a lot of archive drafts for her, so you can see these poems being crafted throughout the years. And I think this is her way of trying to participate in that, but it's just so bad and elementary that it's like a child trying to impress their parents. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like a pat on the head,
I
kind
mean,
of.
is there something unimpressive to us about it because there's just this like it's a melancholy that's like it's like a famous melancholy. It's like I'm famous. I have all of the things, but I'm sad.
It's not so much the content that although the content is pretty vapid, I would
I
say, but
mean, the
I'm
content
not.
really kind of turns me off, but
Yeah.
it's like it's not I don't know. I think there are moments where maybe I'm being unnecessarily bitchy because I'm just like, oh, you're like talking about being sad on a boat to Catalina. Not that she has to actually be on a boat to Catalina, you know?
But I bet she brought her typewriter to type it out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
And there's
lugging
just
that
all of
thing.
this like skylines. Like there's something about just this like love, like just so much Americana, so much like American city skyline, so much neon light, like just so much
And I think that's
identity
a
is wrapped up in this like Hollywood idealism.
I think that's a Ginsberg kind of nod, where I think that's, or at least an influence, where that's something Ginsberg was very good at, the Americana level in the 50s, 60s of exploiting the Americana skyline and thing to his own metaphor, putting something
But this
interesting over
isn't the
top of it.
50s or 60s.
And this isn't Ginsberg. Like, this is not as good. Like, this is just kind of a bland redo copy. And that's why I just got, and I mean, really, I just think that like these celebrity poetry books are part of the larger example as to why poetry is so dead and unimportant and nobody cares about it. Even the presses that supposedly claim they do. But yeah, this is the first of many examples of that. And yeah, it's not good. My problem with it is just that it shows how little thought was put into it, even though they think it was, or she thinks it was a lot of thought, I'm sure, you know?
Yeah, I mean, just these images that are like, look at this van and this palm tree and this sunset all in one image.
Yeah.
It's just so painfully California, you know?
Yeah. And not in a good way. California.
California.
And since I live like kind of like I live close to LA, like I'm like three hours from LA basically. Vegas tries to copy a lot of the LA aesthetic because we get a lot of LA tourists who come here all the time, like for a weekend trip and stuff. And like, so the palm trees next to industrial parks and stuff, like I get that. Like that's a very Southwest kind of West Coast look with the palm trees next to like an industrial park or like this crane or the shitty work van and, whatever. But, So I get what she's trying to go for. Like that's a real aesthetic and vibe. Like Sophie said, it's like kind of that California vibe. But yeah, like I said, I was just mostly embarrassed for her. And there are moments of what I would say like allusion. Sophie said to certain things. There's the one to Robert Frost in that "Past the Bushes, Cypress Thriving."
which I would say is her best title.
Yeah, and that just says farther down the
Also,
road.
maybe one of her best lines.
Yeah, farther down the road, less traveled is.
Yeah, which I don't know why. Why? Like, why is that? I'm not sure I understand that there.
My guess is because again she doesn't know what she's doing, and "The Road Less Traveled" is a very famous poem you read in high school, middle school, and she thinks that just putting this line in there gives it credibility because she doesn't
I just don't know what
understand.
she like thinks it means.
Well,
A lot of Jim Morrison,
yeah,
which I'm just like, how do you get to a certain age and still
it's
like be obsessed with Jim Morrison?
that, and I just think it's these types of different illusions that we
Am
see
I
in
just an
here.
idiot?
It's it struck me as desperate. It's a desperate illusion. It's desperate to try and be engaging
It
with the
doesn't
market.
even feel desperate to me. It just feels kind of juvenile.
What's what I mean? It's juvenile, childlike, desperate to get in there with the Ginsbergs and the Plaths of the world, be considered among their ranks. But it's just childlike and juvenile and desperate attempt to do it. At least that's how
Well,
I
there are
interpreted it.
actually moments that like she expresses almost what feels like a desperation. And there's another poem that I want to talk about. There may be a couple other poems I want to talk about before we get to it, but if I can find it, where she starts writing about how she writes and
Yeah.
why she writes.
Is that one of the ones that's
She talks about being a poet and says like the more I focus on my poetry, and but there's one where she keeps saying, but I am a real poet, right?
uh yeah, I don't remember which one it was. Do you?
Is it Salamander? Yeah, Salamander. It's toward the end. You see, I'm a real poet. My life is my poetry. My lovemaking is my legacy. My thoughts are not for sale. They're about nothing and beautiful and for free. This was not for free. I just want to throw that out there. I did pay like $15 for these thoughts.
Which I can't even fucking find this one. Oh, here it is. Okay. No page numbers. This is why no page numbers is a fucking pain in
Yeah,
the ass.
but yeah, dude, should have gotten the ebook. The lines I just read were on page 114 for me.
My life is my poetry. My lovemaking is my legacy. My thoughts are
Yeah,
not for
this one had
sale.
a lot
Yeah.
of moments that reminded me of America.
Yeah.
I don't want to sell my stories anymore. Stop pushing me. All is one sentence that is punctuated. You know, like that feels very in that vein to me. It does feel very America to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. I'm a real poet. And this is I think this whole book is like summed up in this too. My life is my poetry. Okay. Yeah. My lovemaking is my legacy. And I think that's a good line. My lovemaking is my legacy. And again, this is something that I think could be in like one of her songs, like
Yeah,
that
there's
little
a
bit.
lot of that. There's a lot of that though. And there are moments where it does begin to feel a bit more songish to me. I saw a lot of that throughout here.
Well, I imagine, and
Where
I'm
I was
just
like, this
guessing.
feels like it would make a good song, but maybe not a great poem. Then there's the poem earlier on where she keeps doing a variation on, the more I step into my poetry, the less I will fall into you. And she keeps doing a variation on that over and over. The more I
Yeah.
step into becoming a poet, the less I will fall into being with you. The more I step into my poetry, the less I will fall into being with you. The more I step into my poetry, the less I will fall into being with you. Like there is a desperation. And I think that's intentional, at least in these moments. I don't, I mean, I think there is like a desperate quality to everything
Yeah.
Lana Del Rey does.
And I
But
think it's a deeper desperation than just like I want to be loved, which is all over this book, right? I think it's a desperation to be in the ranks of great artists. That's what it struck me as, especially with these shitty kind of collage of like these smudged iPhone lens photos of abandoned streets in the desert of Southern California. It's I just, I think it's a desperate book.
yeah, because captains aren't like poets. They don't make metaphors between sea and sky.
And some of these are supposed to be like the photos are supposed to be paired up with some of these poems, and that one ringtone, the image with the actual book, the paperback of Hal in it, and like her pills and shit, and her sage all over her.
Yeah, that's later on, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's before the salamander poem, but I was just like, yeah, like this is so try hard.
I put my third phone in the waistband of my leggings.
Yeah,
Only
like,
you have this number.
and this little thing of pills laid out, this thing of sage, this thing of, it looks like weed almost in this one little container, and then there's like all her kind of beauty
Yeah, that's what I thought
products,
too.
lotions, and then there's like a cluttered dresser almost look, and then like a copy of Hal like tucked carelessly in there. And I just thought it was so try hard. I was like, this is so desperate. This is so I'm an artist. Look at me.
This is
Kind
so
of.
Instagram.
Yes, Instagram. And again, Instagram breeds desperation in people probably, but yeah. I
It's very
just
photo class. It's very
yeah, and like
still
high
life.
school photo class
Very
or
my first still life.
yeah. And it really clashes when you see the aesthetic of like the 1950s photos of these people reading newspapers and physical books, something people don't do anymore. It really doesn't fit. These kind of like classic mid-century photos don't really fit with what she's trying to do here. Again, I just think it's a lack of vision. It's a lack of aesthetic. It's a lack of.
I mean, I think there is very much an aesthetic, and I think maybe that's some of the problem.
Well, if I guess you say it's only aesthetic,
I
because
mean,
that
to
was
some
be
degree,
my
it feels like very aesthetic driven, which isn't like necessarily wrong.
right.
Like you can be driven by that, but it's just like it feels like it's that on every level and it's too much. It's also it just lacks something that like the part of the reason why it works better, I think, as performance than as a book, is because when you're reading poems, like often you're looking for there to be like depth,
Right.
right? And there is, that's not to say this is entirely without that. It's like there, but there is a lot in here that I think it honestly just sounds better with her reading it.
Right.
It like in a way that I don't think anyone can really recreate reading it on their own. I think she has very much her own voice in mind. I don't get the sense that there is a speaker that is not Lana. If I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
and that is a thing that I think maybe distinguishes it from other poetry. Like, and I think that's also something that you do when you're like a new poet, right? Like, you don't have a distinction between who you are and who is the speaker of the poem always, unless
Yeah.
you're like writing something that's sort of in a fictional voice. But often I don't think that's like where you start, right? Like, you start with the thing that's the most autobiographical. At least now we do. I don't, that was not always the case.
And as it starts to get to this section where she starts to do these little haikus and things.
Oh, don't even. Like, can we just forget they happened? I feel like I'm
Well,
gonna be so mean.
well, the one that's like, my life is my poetry, my lovemaking is my legacy. 2 pages after that, the same line is in a different poem.
Yeah.
Or no, it's actually just a smaller part of of the same poem, and it's published as if it's different, or I don't know. says, "I love you, but you don't understand me. You see, I'm a real poet. My life is my poetry. My lovemaking is my legacy." And that's just like a small section of that poem Salamander, and it's for some reason 2 pages after this. Again, like there is no vision. Like that's what I keep thinking about this the most, is that this seems like a hodgepodge collage. And I think collaging has gotten more people are drawn to collaging because they can't do anything else, but yeah, and then we have this dude, the
Well, I would say
colored.
also, though, we've gotten really used to collections of poems that have some kind of narrative arc, and I would suggest that that doesn't need to be. And,
Sure.
I like we tend to, sort of lump poems thematically or formally or, just whatever it is, whatever makes a strong connection from one poem to the next. You don't always have it in mind when you're writing them. But I can see what you mean maybe by lack of vision. I think like she has it, it's just not something that we like.
I don't even like what is the vision. I couldn't even tell you.
I mean, I think it's everything we've already said. It's just like
Yeah,
this sort of idealized, like Hollywood romantic glam girl plus some melancholia.
yeah. Which I
Like,
would,
I think
yeah.
that was
That's
her vision of like her sort of identity. That's like what she created as a songwriter, whether or not she meant to. Like, that's what she liked enough to write.
yeah.
That's what she likes enough to write here. So, like, I think that it's there. It's just her vision for her whole career, not like for this book
I,
necessarily,
yeah.
right?
I, yeah. It's
Like she is her vision to some degree.
yeah.
Um, I
And
mean,
the
she says
colored
it.
pencils, dude. The colored pencils. What did you think?
I think her life is her poetry. Um, colored pencils. Where are we at?
It's this one little section that's like a 2 line poem. It's after Salamander. It's like a couple pages after that. You can have a life beyond your wildest dreams. All you have to do is change
Oh yeah.
everything, and then all you have
Oh,
to do
that,
is
yeah. I was confused by that. I was like, what is this? Is it its own? Is this is this part of Salamander? I guess it is. It's the end of Salamander. It has to be,
yeah.
right?
I mean, again, I don't know because I think this has no vision whatsoever. It's just a hodgepodge of like what she thinks is cool. But yeah, and I think the colored pencils again, it just makes me think of how childish this is.
But
How
again, for me, it's not in colored pencils. It's like
yeah, but it's
in
blue,
a
pink, and
different
then
type.
green in these kind of handwritten. Can you even see it?
Yeah, and one all is capitalized. It's the one in the middle. I don't understand why. It's just like small things like that that'll kind of piss you off because like as
I
somebody
mean,
who like trained, you're
you
kind of
know
like,
why?
dude, like
I mean, the answer
can you
why.
just like have some uniformity or like some intention here
That's what I
with
mean.
how you're using
Intention. That
capitalization? That like that's where I would pick on it.
that's what I
Not
mean. Like
not
there is no intention. Like I see
lady
no
reading.
intention. Yeah, and I think
Just a
this
lady
is.
reading the
Do you
news
remember this, Soph? You and
while
I were in.
also being a woman.
Do you remember this, Soph? And you and I were in a grad school. I mean, not grad school, undergrad together. And we were in this shitty workshop, and that one girl who started turning in poems in colored font. Like she would literally change the ink color in the Microsoft Word document to be bright pink or bright blue. And it's just this
Mhm.
kind of arts and crafts. Like I'm a middle school mom. Like that's all I
Was this at
aspire.
like the higher level? Was this at like a 300 level
No, this
class?
was
Or is this
200
like,
level. This was
okay,
community college when we were.
okay, so this was one or 200.
Yeah. And it was just. And I just like when I saw this colored pencil over and over again type thing, and I get that she was probably on SSRIs or Xanax or something, and like this looked really pretty to her or whatever. This little
You
rainbow
think that's how it
colors.
works, man?
I
You
I,
put you on SSRIs and colored pencils look better now.
I think it makes it. It would change as well. I would say it changes the brain chemistry to a degree to where. I mean, it's just a fucking theory, Like I don't know. It just that's what it
I
struck
mean,
me
I think
as.
it's just like she wanted to use colored pencils to make
But
this repetition
but why, right?
different.
Like
It was pretty.
why? because it's pretty, right? Yeah, like, but it's not. Like, it looks like crayon. Like, it looks like she's writing her stuff in
Yeah,
crayon.
I'm
Like,
curious. You should send me a picture because I'm curious to see what it looks like in your copy because I don't,
I'll send it now so
because
that you
again,
can
it's
get a
just
little.
typed, so it's like a basic like all of these colors I'm familiar with from Word, you know,
Yeah,
from like working in like Google Docs or Microsoft Word.
yeah. I sent the
But it's like
photo.
all the small things that you don't have to do because you're famous, you know? Like you like all the small things like, pay attention to what you're capitalizing
Well, I
and have
just
it
right. There
do it for a
is no
reason.
intention. It is scattered. It is scattered like the
But
inside of
also
somebody's
everyone will
brain.
create the intention for her. She has enough fans that will be like, "No, this is what she meant." Like she doesn't have to do that, you know? She's not like
Well,
someone with a really, really small following
this
who
and I
like has to explain themselves.
and I think that's where we kind of fall victim to being overly generous. Is like, oh, she doesn't have to. I'm like, well, why doesn't she have to? Because the fans won't care. It's like, yeah, but her fans don't give a shit about
Well, it also
poetry.
doesn't really impact her career in any
Of
major way.
course.
Like, I mean, she will still be famous. She was still famous after this book. She will continue to be famous regardless of us bashing her. And like, again, this isn't to be like she's an idiot. She should never write again. Like, whatever. Like, do your
I
thing.
would make that statement. She should never
But
write a book again. Yeah.
I don't, well, I mean, obviously she also writes songs, like
Yeah,
we're
she could
not,
keep writing songs. Just don't write a book. Don't do a book again, Lana. It's
I
terrible.
just think that this is poets like comics are inherently quite sad, better off alone. That felt like an Instagram poem to me.
Yeah.
And like I'm just like, but how many people have written exactly this thing? But that's why something like this can be popular, right?
Do,
Because someone looks at that and says, I can do this.
well, this is what I'm
Or
struggling with.
I think that's deep because they
Right.
don't actually run that deep,
And what I'm struggling with these types of like colored pencil things, like, okay, she did it because she thought it was pretty. Did she really think that was pretty? Like, is that, that little scribbled, handwritten, 3 different colors, like I'm marking up
She
my.
was doodling, man.
That's what I mean. It's a doodle. It's a mindless act. And I think this just shows how mindless it is. Like,
I stepped on a bird,
there,
cried in my new boyfriend's arms. To live is to kill.
like, there is no intention. There is no vision. There is no artistic goal that's being achieved. It is just a hodgepodge. It is mindless. It is aimless. It is little kid scribbling in their craft book and thinking these colored pencils together, repeating the same line, which
I mean, the
is,
colored pencils is like the haikus to me.
yeah, well, that's the same thing. But I just mean the colored pencils like literally represents this. And I was just like, man, I can't believe that anyone takes this seriously. And I get, sure, her fans are going to take it seriously, sure. But I just mean, like,
Right, but serious readers don't.
yeah, I mean, I was embarrassed for her reading this. Like, I was like, you're making yourself look bad, like somebody who has no idea what they're doing. And I think that's just really what drove me crazy about this entire book was I was like, you don't know what you're doing.
She does, but again, let's remind ourselves that like most of the world isn't reading poetry. Like it's
Sure.
not exactly the most popular. So
Well,
it's like, yeah, to the world that isn't reading poems, I can see them picking this up and being like, wow,
yeah,
that's meaningful.
yeah. And this is essentially, I mean, this line, all you have to do is change everything. I mean, this is a Pink song. This is Pink's first big hit, Don't Let Me Get Me. Like, that's what it is.
It was a banger.
Yeah, that is a banger. I like Pink, but it's just like,
Yeah, it was a good album.
they told me you'll be a pop star. All you have to do is
Can't
change
take me
everything
home.
you are. Yeah. Like that's the line from the Don't Let Me Get Me song. And like
So
this is
good.
the same thing, right? All you have to do is change everything. And it's like I don't know, not only is it a stale sentiment, I just think it, like I said, it just adds to my,
Maybe that's what a lot of it is. It's a little bit stale.
well, it is. And that's what I
I
mean.
mean, in combination with the sort of craft related issues, but yeah, I think a lot of it does feel stale. A lot of the sentiment does feel kind of stale.
And I think the reason I keep saying collage and hodgepodge is because it is just kind of this random kind of, the best I can figure it is this kind of assortment of random ideas that are all pretty stale at this point, considering how fast the world moves. So these would have been really cool aesthetics, 2006, 2007, and then
That and just black and white images of like people reading
yeah,
during
from
that
like
time period.
the 50s, yeah, and it's
Or
like
like this image of California, I'm assuming, where we have a liquor sign
yeah, and you see
because
the
like
kind of
19 and in a photo class for the first time.
right, yeah, and I kept thinking of like
That's very much how it feels.
what, yeah, this whole book felt
Really not
like
even like I mean it feels very high school photo
dude,
class.
that's exactly it. This whole book felt like I was walking in the halls of a high school and seeing the artwork pinned to the sides of the walls from like the art department or whatever. And that's what it felt like reading this. And that's why I kept saying juvenile, childlike, like
Yeah, I mean
this is
listen
an
to it. For years I
embarrassment.
begged you to just take me in your arms. You wouldn't. Couldn't. I mean, like when you like I know I've been jokingly reading each of these in like the Lana Del Rey voice, but that's the only way they're good to me. Like I said, I liked I didn't love it, but it was a lot less grating to me to hear her read them and like the voice that she clear like I think she intends it to be read with. Because when I read this like out loud, it has nothing going for it really, with the exception of a few lines here and there. That was maybe a bit mean. But, you know, I stepped on a bird, cried in my new boyfriend's arms. To live is to kill.
So deep. Yeah, you want to hit the I didn't have a lot about the haikus, but the way this book ends, listeners, is there's
I didn't
this
take a single note on the
yeah,
haikus.
me neither. I just have a few questions as to, what are the point of haikus, but there's like, so we have this hodgepodge, and then at the end we have this little section of small haikus next to these mostly kind of classic archived photos that we've been talking about from like
Of
the
mostly
50s.
women reading.
Yeah, reading at
A
the
few men.
table. A few men, but they're usually younger, like boys, reading comic books or whatever in an old school setting. And I just thought, like, the haikus in general, like, why do bad writers, or let's not say bad, let's say amateur writers, why do they love haikus so much? Why is haiku one of the first things that they go to?
Because it seems like, well, first of all, they happen very quickly. You can sit there for 5 minutes and think of a haiku and be done.
Right.
That's 3 lines you have to edit, if at all. All you're doing is counting syllables.
And of course, haikus are usually
I
about
mean, it's
nature.
not.
They don't
Yeah,
have to
they're
be.
also usually, isn't there like, they're usually pretty image focused, right?
Well, you'd have
Like,
to be with that small of a space. So it's a very restrictive space, which I think a lot of
yeah,
amateurs don't understand how
they
restrictive
don't
haikus are.
understand. Well, and they
Yeah.
don't always use the sort of, I think the reason why the image thing is important is because that's the only way I've ever seen a haiku be interesting, right? Um,
Well, that's the
because
challenge of it.
otherwise
Yeah.
you're just like, because think about it, like in 3 lines, that can only be a certain length, right?
Right.
Was it 575, right?
Yeah. Traditionally. Yeah.
Uh, you know, you can run into that problem where you have not written enough to be a poem, but you are also limited to this space. And all you've said is like, sort of a basic statement, like there's nothing really in it that defines it as a poem except for the fact that it happens to be the right number of syllables and broken into lines. It doesn't sound nice.
Yeah.
It doesn't provide you with any kind of image except for I stepped on a bird. And again, I don't think traditionally that's where haikus would go for an image of a dead bird. Like it would
Right.
be more, it would be less about the action of like narrating I stepped on a bird, like
Yeah.
I think, and just showing the image of the bird and creating a contrast between things in those 3 lines.
Well, that's the thing is I think
Or creating a mood instead of being like I stepped on a bird and I cried in my boyfriend's arms. To live is to kill. Like
this is
that just feels, I don't know, that feels very like, that feels very teenager to me.
it is. Yeah. And I think that's the mistake. People confuse haikus because they're small with easy.
The
Or
shorter the poem, I mean, like
yeah,
it goes both ways. The shorter the poem, the harder it is. The longer the poem, the harder it is. There is like this middle ground, sweet spot
right.
that I think we tend to write to. Like a lot of contemporary poets will sort of write to a certain length a little bit.
And I think a lot of these strike me as, yeah, maybe, cast off lyrics, things that came to her or something and she wrote it down that she would, I assume she wrote this like she writes lyrics to her songs. So she does a combination of writing a note on a nightstand, writing a note in her notes app or something when she thinks of something and then puts it into a song. I mean, a lot of songwriters do that, right? A lot of writers do this to write. But like the thing with haikus is it's just like, I feel like a lot of these read as if they were one-off little lyrics to songs. Yeah, and
Jasmine in the air, the burden of fame is real. Never felt so clear.
and she might have manipulated them to hit the syllable count and then put them in here. But that's the thing, is that they composed as haikus, it doesn't strike me as they were. And again, like everything else, it strikes me as somebody who has no understanding of what it is. And this is celebrity poetry, so fine. She doesn't need to put a book out like this because her name will sell the book regardless. But it just kind of, I think, summed it up for me. These kind of haikus that everybody goes to. And I see a lot of Instagram poets doing this, a lot of bad poets that for
Also
some
for
reason,
loving poets that like are big on sort of the everyman and getting at something that maybe not entirely, but is more universal, like is not just Hollywood glamour living. Like I think it's kind of interesting that I don't see a lot of that in here. I don't see a lot of the everyman in here.
yeah, because it's not.
Maybe I just haven't tried to, but it feels very much like someone trying to find themselves by writing poems, which is fine. People do that. Or you poets do that all the time.
Yeah.
It just is doing that, it feels like, without quite as much attention to craft as I think we would like.
All right, I have to pee real quick, and then I just have a few more questions. I'm almost done.
In the meantime, I will read to you a couple of poems that are not in the haiku section. Poem 1. I'm writing my future. Poem 2. The universe exists because we are aware of it. That's it. I was just filling readers in on 2 pages of poems. The first being I'm writing my future, and the second being the universe exists because we are aware of it. It's like those are just like ideas you had.
You know what this
Like
reminds
where-
me of?
Being high.
Yes, it reminds me of when I was 19 and did shrooms for the first time in my friend's
Reminds
fucking
me of getting
apartment.
stoned for the first
Yeah,
time.
my friend's fucking apartment in Towson. Donnybrook, shout out, right? And this, like, he brought home these shrooms and we did them. And dude, like, I remember we were like
You're
writing
like,
things.
everything has a
Right.
vibration.
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
writing stuff down. We were writing stuff down on notebooks and stuff, like
Yeah,
little
everyone does
19-year-old
the first time
fuckers.
they do some kind of hallucination.
Right.
You're like, my
And
mind
thinking,
is open. I am one with the universe. It flows fucking through me.
right, and thinking it was great. So I'm thinking she's doing, like, this is what it all strikes me as, is the first time somebody does
She's just
drugs.
microdosing.
Yeah, and thinks that
Hollywood
like they've
microdosing.
discovered this new world and everything they're writing is great and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's one of those things where it's like you're having revelations and you think that it's going to be news to other people.
Right.
And it's like, I feel like other people had this idea when they were 18
And it's
or like
mostly-
16.
And
or
it's
like
mostly
whatever.
when you're young, it's mostly because I hadn't read enough. Like I hadn't read enough
Yeah.
people that had, lived 100,
You're
300
also just
years.
not that
Yeah.
developed.
Right. So you didn't
Like,
understand
Which,
that, like,
of course, maybe part of that is because you haven't read enough, like you haven't been pushed to, right?
Baldwin always said,
We're
we
also
talked
naive
about,
and
yeah, and we talked about this on the Baldwin episode where he just said, you think that your suffering is totally unique, and then you read books and you realize that actually it's not unique at all. Like your suffering is just like everybody
well,
else's.
yeah.
like regardless of your character, your different characteristics, your traits, your immutable characteristics, like it's this the human suffering that we all experience.
Well, you think it's unique, and then like your brain finishes developing.
Or you just, I think it's ignorance if you think it's that unique, like it's, you just
Like,
don't
yeah.
know enough yet to understand that
But I mean, there
actually
is
the guy
something
next to
to
you in
like
line
that
is
sort
feeling
of
the same thing. Like,
right. Well, I mean, I think some of that isn't even about like people's ability to see that. It's like a just like a lack of awareness,
yeah.
It's not like
And what
in the
is being
actual
aware? I mean, being educated, being
right. But I think
understanding.
people can be that educated, like we can be educated and still like be so mindlessly self-centered in that way. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't even remember where we're going from that. But yeah, it's just like, yeah, it's like she did mushrooms and like she had an idea and she thought like this is gonna blow some minds. And it probably did for a 15-year-old somewhere.
I mean, I've heard like 30-year-olds talk about how much this touched
Well, there
them,
you go.
dude. Like,
Depress me.
yeah, I've heard podcast. Yeah, like this is.
I mean, like, it's fine. I get it. I
Yeah.
know. Because, right, like, reading poetry can be a pain in the ass sometimes. Like, if you're not into that, even if, like, you are into that and you're just, like, not in the mood, like, you don't have to fucking want to decipher something or, like, have the experience of the poem,
Well, that's the
like,
thing
and
is
have
that-
to be comfortable with not understanding everything. Like, you don't have to
Well,
want that all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that
A lot of people don't want it ever.
the distinction that we're making, that I think needs to be made after everything we've said, is that we're not talking that it needs to be hard and complex. That doesn't necessarily, that's not what we mean when we say it's juvenile or elementary, because there are great poems that are very simple, right? Like you don't have to do these elaborate things.
I mean,
Ginsberg's
there's a great
example of
poem
that.
somewhere that says that the universe exists because we are aware of it, but it's a longer poem that has spent more time, like, thinking about how do I convey this idea in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Because in and of itself, I don't know that, like, that just sounds like sort of just like basic stoner language.
That's what it is. Yeah. It's basic like stoner. Wow. G wow LSD. G wow Firefly, as Holiday would say.
Oh, it's just a firefly.
Yeah. LSD. Wow.
Poetry.
Firefly. Yeah. Okay. These blank pages at the end. We're almost done here,
What,
listeners.
notes for poets?
Yeah. The notes for poets. Yeah.
Well, at least she's acknowledging that mostly poets read poetry.
Yeah, and I get the call to action aspect where it's like write your own or like write notes on this.
Write
and,
your future.
Yeah, write your life. Your life is your poetry type thing, and
You'll never have my existence, but you can write and pretend that someday it will be.
but yeah, I just like, why do we think those pages are there? I guess we already said it, but
Because she thought it was fun, because her book wasn't long enough. Like,
she wanted it to be audience
there's
participation.
too many. I mean, yeah, I'm sure she had some idea of like, I'm the everyman and I'm inviting you to add to my book, or I'm
Right.
inviting you to, like I can see her
Yeah.
doing that. I could see her. So like now you're a participant because you are literally writing on the pages of my book.
This book
Adding
is for
her.
you. Yeah, this book is
Yeah,
for
it's very. It
us.
feels very romantic in that way.
And self-important. Like there's, like I said, there's like a
Yes.
self-importance to that. Like when you
But
think,
I like that goes along with it feeling kind of juvenile, right? Maybe like I
Yes.
feel like juvenile is like we mean like young, right? Like there is something
Yeah.
that's very young about this poem, and like
immature,
And-
young. Yeah.
I mean, even in like great poets, you see that too, right? It's different because obviously she's like a pop person, right? Like she is a pop icon. She is not like
Right.
some obscure famous poet who, like, even if they are now famous, were at one time or another probably kind of obscure. And like even when I think of like Auden's first poems, like his earliest work, that's like the most reminiscent of like T.S. Eliot, or like it's still really heavily influenced by that, and is like doesn't feel like we find those poems fun because they're so energetic and they like have this sort of youthful push to them, and they like are just throwing it all out there. But Like it's not Auden, the later, more developed poem where he's like writing his,
Yeah.
the poems that we most cherish. Although some of the
Y-
poems we most cherish are kind of earlier, and he detests now,
Well, I think you bring
or
up a
did
good point
detest.
with, and I go into this a little bit, listeners that are interested. I go into this a little bit on the bonus episodes with A Christmas Carol, where I start talking about, like Sophie mentioned this kind of the inherent kind of silliness or childishness of creativity, right? Like there's a little bit of that in almost every creative project because it is, it's make believe time. It's
Well, and there
pretend
is
time.
some element
It's
of self-importance to it, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's like, I mean, I would argue that there is, right? Like, because again, it's silly time, like it's creative time. It's also like it's not saving the world.
And I talked about this in the bonus. So listeners, if you want to hear this, you got to subscribe, patreon.com/heavyboard. But like, I talk about this a little bit in the context of the animated versions of A Christmas Carol when I go into that. And it just like, there is something silly about story creation because it's make believe. We're making it up. It's pretend. It's this kind of, there's a little whimsy to it. And we talked about this on our actual Christmas Carol episode, the whimsiness in the actual book and kind of spirits and ghosts, right? This kind of make believe, childish fantasy. And that's in a lot of creative stuff. So it is like, she's on the right track if you're following that kind of stuff. But then like the idea is to refine that, not refine it out of it entirely, because like we said in the Christmas Carol episode, like a lot of times it works to have a little childishness or whimsy in like a creative work. But like, yeah, it just, there's a juvenile sense that is not, yeah, maybe the better word for it is immature, like you said, using the Auden example. As you mature and keep working at it and practicing and things like that. I mean, all artists do
Well, yeah,
this. You
and
look
it's
back
not,
at your old
again, some
work.
of it
Yeah.
again is like the ideas. I get it. Like she's, probably what our age range.
I think she's a couple years old. I think she's like 35, 36. So she's like a couple
Sure.
years, but millennial. So she's a millennial
Yeah.
like us, an
I
elder
mean,
millennial.
sure. She's our
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah.
Um,
And a big pop star of our generation, essentially. Like,
yeah, so she's already like got that, she's already like living in that world, where I just assume, and maybe wrongly assume, I don't know, someone correct me, that there is like this almost, I don't want to say stuntedness, but like they're a little behind,
yeah. The
like
childishness.
you
Yeah.
know, yeah, if you're gonna get away with like just having read like Ginsberg and like these few poets that she references, and I'm sure she's read others, um, but like these are clearly the ones that so heavily influenced her in a way that I feel like we were so heavily influenced when we started writing poetry.
Right.
And I feel like, I guess if you're going through that at like in your 30s, like there's still part of me that expects something slightly more nuanced, but I guess maybe not coming from someone who really like romanticizes that lifestyle
Yeah.
of just being like an artist and I dictate my poems and then I write them down
Well, this
on
is the
my
mistake.
typewriter.
This is the mistake that everybody makes in all creative processes is because the way you're creative is this kind of raw shit that comes out of your head, that they believe that that's all there is to it, right? Whereas like the actual craft of creativity is taking that raw material that anybody can do because it's just a human quality. You can make up shit in your head and like put it out there. But the actual craft of it is refining that raw material into something, shaping the material, as Bloom would say. This kind of like, you can take this little idea, but then, make it new, make it original, make it unique in some way. But not even that she has to do that because, again, we're talking celebrity poetry. It's just, yeah, there is this, it's not whiny, but it's bordering on this kind of, and I don't want to get into, wealth and all that stuff because people criticize everyone for wealth all the time. Like, as if that's a valid criticism of art. It's not. Like if you talk about how wealthy the artist is, like it's not a criticism, it's a personal vendetta. But like there is this little bit, if you're a 35-year-old person living in America right now and this is like the deepest you can go, like yeah, like it's just another example of the kind of stunted childhood or prolonged adolescence that we're all living through, and especially millennials, our generation, that gets criticized for it a lot. We tend to have a prolonged adolescence compared to previous generations, and there's all kinds of theories about it. Most of them are unprovable and bullshit, but we defend millennials on this podcast because we are them, right? Millennials get a lot of fucking shit, a lot of it that we don't deserve, but still, I don't know. We can move on because it's just.
We are self-involved, though. Apparently, those 2 extra short, like 2-line poems that I read were actually just part of thanks to the locals. But they're just like also on pages on their own after
What?
2 pictures.
Yeah, and why do you think she did that? That's a good thing.
I don't know,
There's
because
a
it
few
doesn't
poems.
make sense to me.
Right. There's a few poems where that happens, and we pointed out the one with Salamander, and then you said this other one. Yeah.
And of course, I like, if we're going to talk about the idea of this as a performance, if we heard it as a performance, I don't think we would know that because we also like wouldn't see these pictures. The
Right.
pictures are not part of the performance, at least as an audio thing. And I feel like there is very much, I don't know, a way that she could have integrated all of these things as like one thing, but yeah, whatever. It's like, something that's made for mass consumption, so they're gonna do it in all of the possible ways to get people to buy it.
For me, the best I can tell from an artistic point of view is that she really liked those lines, and again, it's just kind of more evidence that she didn't really
And
know
it
what
just
she
didn't
was.
feel right at the end of the poem.
I just think she wanted to emphasize them, and again, not quite understanding the art form
'Cause
she's
they don't
working in.
belong.
Yeah,
They don't belong at the end of the poem at all. So unless she's using it as a way to make distinct sections, which again doesn't make sense with the poem.
yeah. And I think it might be, again, kind of copying a Ginsberg style without necessarily understanding what he's doing with that kind of stuff.
But this is also where young poets get self-important because
And,
they want to keep all their lines.
That's true, right? And young poets, okay, great, like young poets, but young poets are not getting books published, right? Because usually it's not good enough. But like this is the exception because she has a built-in audience. So of course Simon and Schuster wants to capitalize on that, make a little money off a poetry
Well, yeah,
book,
and also
which is
because
rare.
okay, it's the book of poems that we know we can make money on.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the built-in audience is more and more
Yeah.
important. We talked about this on our last episode, listeners,
Because
and we talk about it all the time. But
Yeah, because
Yeah.
no one anticipates much of an audience for poetry.
yeah, and there isn't, if we're being honest. But I just have did we hit almost everything you wanted?
Yeah, pretty much. I'll look back and see if there's anything. I might want to say something about, because I did want to say the one with, what is it? What's the title? Find it. I fucking hate scanning through these fucking ebooks. I
Yeah.
feel like I sound like a curmudgeon.
No, dude.
Like I find them very
ebooks-
convenient in some ways. They can be very convenient. Sometimes they're really convenient for taking notes in them. But when
Right.
it comes to, or like searching for something in particular,
And it's important to the distinction between an ebook for fiction and like that's the format ebooks work best in when you're reading long form. When you're reading something like poetry, an ebook is kind of disorienting. We haven't quite figured out how to make it work in ebook format yet, and maybe we never
past
will.
the
but-
bushes, cypress thriving. Again, also weird here, cypress being the only other word that's capitalized in the title. When most of her titles, it's just the first word gets a cap.
Yeah.
So it's just like in sentence case. I was like confused by this poem, but then, yeah, there was like this moment in this poem. Your fingers wiping oil on the paper with precision, with decision like an artist never seen yet with a vision. It was just like, whoa, that's like a little too much. Like the rhythm is already there so heavily. And this is like a fun little stanza. But like, can you just change that to deciding? So that it says your fingers wiping oil on the paper with precision, deciding like an artist never seen it with a vision. Just something else. Like you don't need that extra rhyme there. You just don't. It's too much. That was just one instance of that I wanted to throw out. But
Yeah.
there are also moments in this poem that I did really like.
Like what?
But it also doesn't really make sense.
Georgia
like-
O'Keeffe, Georgia Peaches. Yeah. Doing
Forget
nothing
teachers,
for yeah.
forgive him forever leaving. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's fucking fun. It's not. I'm
And
not
it
sure
is
why
this-
it's here.
it's this random assortment of the most basic stuff you get in
Yeah,
high school.
Georgia O'Keeffe,
Yeah,
Georgia Peaches doing
Georgia
nothing but your
O'Keeffe,
painting
dude.
or forever
Okay,
forget teachers, forgive him forever leaving. Like
you
it's
you
nonsense
can ask me
essentially.
about you can correct me for this, but like I went to a certain type of school where they were prepping for college and stuff. So like there are differences even when I talk to my wife in terms of the curriculum I learned in high school, what they were giving me, and the things you learn, right? When you're just learning basic English courses and the basic history of art in like a curriculum in high school, right? So you learn Ginsberg, yeah, you learn Plath, you learn Norman Rockwell, you learn Georgia O'Keeffe, you learn, Picasso, you learn these basic names that everybody knows because it's part of the basic kind of,
Yeah.
Western basic high school education. And it's all in this book. Like she thinks that these are really like good,
Yeah.
and it just, like I said, I was embarrassed for her reading a lot of this. Like, you're showing your limitations here as an artist and intellectual.
Well, it just has a lot of what I would identify as stuff that works in lyrics and not in a written poem.
Yeah, and
It's like you
I'm a
can have a
fan
certain
of,
level of
yeah,
cheesiness. You can get away with a certain kind of cheesiness in lyrics that you can't in in this form. And it's just because, yeah, the music is louder than the lyrics. Like that's what matters the most. Or sometimes whether they're yelling it versus being quiet about it. Like all of these things, the things that make it actually like sound, right?
right. There's a driving pulse usually to a music too. There's a beat, right? That follow the beat,
Yeah.
and the beat drives energy. It can make you very and we talk about this a little bit with poetry. Ginsberg could establish that beat without music, and
A
that's
song also
kind
doesn't
of
have to make sense for us to like it.
right. Yeah, it could be like
Well, I mean, we could
everybody.
say the same of a poem, so maybe that's not a great comparison.
Well,
Just,
yeah, but songs at the same time, like
but
Stairway
they're
to
gonna get
Heaven.
less scrutiny for not making sense
Yeah, there's
than
songs like Stairway to Heaven, like the lyrics make no fucking sense, like, but everybody loves that song. It's one of the most famous rock songs ever written and stuff like that. But like, if you actually read the lyrics or like listen to the lyric, like it really makes no fucking sense at all. And whatever, right? Because what we really care about is the kind of crescendo throughout the song, the
right.
screaming guitar solos, the kind of Robert Plant kind of wailing, kind of like
Looking
that
for a
all,
drop.
yeah, that all comes in to propelling the art forward, as opposed to poetry where you're limited to just the words on the page and not this driving backbeat, not
To
this screaming
create,
guitar
again, the
solo.
words on the page are also more than just like the words on the page, right? They're supposed to do the work of creating,
Yeah,
you know, the thing that stands in as a performance, right?
yeah. And like I said, I know at
The
least
enunciative apparatus.
yeah. And I know at least one of my friends that's going to be pissed at me for even bad mouthing Lana at all, but
Sorry, that person.
yeah, I say it's always it's yeah. My friends that all happen to be gay tend to, for some reason, all happen to love Lana too. It's like a very, it's like a very.
And I don't have an issue with Lana
Well, right,
necessarily.
yeah, yeah.
Very happy for her and her big haunted pussy.
She what? Big haunted pussy. What
Yeah.
is that
She
like
write
a
about her
thing?
big haunted pussy.
Oh, is that
Yeah.
what she said? That's like a lyric, like a famous, like a
Or
memed
is that just
lyric.
something that we say about her?
I don't know. I have no
I feel
idea.
like oh yeah. I mean, yeah, she just like talks about her pussy sometimes.
Which is fair game, right?
My
That's
pussy
not.
tastes like Pepsi Cola.
Yeah, and that would be something that you would see in like a rap song, even like that's like a
My
rap
eyes are
lyric.
wide like cherry
Yeah,
pie.
yeah. My pussy tastes like Coca-Cola. That sounds like a rap lyric to me. Yeah,
Yeah, it does.
like a
But
Nicki Minaj line.
I don't remember what it was. There was some post about Lana Del Rey's big haunted pussy, and I was
Big haunted pussy. I like that though. That should
yeah,
be.
it's great. That should be a line.
Yeah, that'll be in our
Big
description.
haunted pussy.
Sophie and Andrew discuss Lana's big haunted pussy, and that'll be our description. I just have a few questions left, literally like dumb, stupid. One, we kind of already answered this. Why was this published?
Because Lana Del Rey wanted to be a poet. I think
Yeah,
that was pretty clear with, you know, a line.
I get down to be poetry.
Yeah. I think it's more of a
I
business
got feathers
decision.
in my hair.
Yeah. So Simon and Schuster, whatever her
There
agent.
is something that she embraces where she's like, yeah, I am about the aesthetic. I'm letting you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, so I do kind of, that's part of what I mean too when I say like, well, at least it's like, there is something about it that is a little bit like unpretentious, where it's like, yeah, we know her. We know that she like announces aloud that she's just sort of about this. I mean, and maybe I read that more like superficially than I should. That is her announcing like, hey, I just like the way beat poetry looks on me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
But I feel like that's kind of what she's saying there.
Yeah. Yeah. And we already answered this. Yeah. So.
And you also know I have all of these records. I have all of the jazz and blues.
Right.
Like,
And
that's
look, I
basically
love
what that song
blues,
is.
and I
That's a
like.
great song. Brooklyn Baby's
Yeah.
a great song.
Yeah.
But
And I like her influence of that. She takes that seriously. But my next thing, okay, so we already kind of said the publishing, and then we talk about this because this is a writing podcast. The business side makes sense. So if her agent went to Simon and Schuster and said, "Hey, Lana wants to put out a book of poetry," their ears perk up because, okay, sure, we'll put that
yeah,
out.
they
because
probably
that'll-
didn't do a lot of shopping it around.
Right.
They probably just were deciding who was going to,
right,
either
because
give her the biggest buck
built-in
for it.
audience. She sells,
Yeah.
platinum records, and even if only a fraction of those platinum record sales go into book sales, it's way more than normal, and they're going to make money off of it.
And
I
again,
think
that's like not really typical for
Yeah.
most poets. Like you don't just go and
Right.
get it published.
Yeah, that's not
unless
gonna
you're
happen.
like Carl Phillips.
Yeah, but even so, I would say Carl Phillips, even though I'm not a huge fan of him, as listeners know, like he earned that. He's earned
Yeah.
that over
Yeah.
decades of being able
Right,
to just go
but,
to
like,
a press. Yeah,
That's why I'm
so-
saying like there are not a lot of poets that you can just go and be like, I have this book. Do you want it? Who
Right.
are-
Yeah.
will always get their book taken, right?
So
like
we
there are very
know-
few living poets like that.
And I think maybe that's why and I didn't want to attack this book for something dumb like that, like the nepotistic reasons or the business
And again,
reasons.
I also wouldn't be surprised if Lana Del Rey sold more copies of this book than Carl Phillips did of
Right, yeah, of
either
course.
of his most recent books.
Yeah, I'm sure the book sales are way better than most. But so that's just basically what happens, and you hear us purposely. We didn't want to talk about this kind of, was she just the only reason it got published because she's a celebrity, even though that's true. I think that's a weak. If we're talking about it as a serious poetry and art consumers,
I think there is a
it's a weak
history
argument.
of like
yeah.
singer-songwriter poets.
Yeah, like I said, Dylan, Morrison, all these people that we call poets.
I mean,
and
Leonard Cohen.
Leonard Cohen
Patti
is another
Smith.
one. Patti Smith, yeah.
I mean, like this is very much of the era that she so badly
But-
wants to embody.
But did Cohen
that
put out a
ex-
book of poems?
Yeah.
Like he
There's a
did.
collection. I have one.
Oh,
I
is it
mean, I
good?
have his like songs. I mean, a lot of it is like his songs. Like, I mean,
Right. And he
But
had some
that's the
great
thing.
songs.
he had some great songs that had some really great lyrics that I do want to read. Like that are
Right.
because they are good and because they are complicated and like because, like, yeah, I mean, the lyrics to Avalanche is great. They're just great. Like, and it can be interesting to see where like the poem form can differ from a song form.
Yeah.
Like because he has some that are like the poem form of the song. Like so
Right.
that can sometimes be interesting, but you also know what you're going into.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we
so-
also knew kind of what I feel like I knew what I was going into. I
Yeah.
feel like I knew that I was going to find some poems that felt more like song. Some bummers.
Yeah, and I just mean, yeah, so we don't want to attack for that because I think that's a weak criticism. We want to talk about the art. We don't want to talk about, necessarily why this got published, however, nepotism, blah, blah. Another question I have, is Lana serious? Is this serious?
I think she's serious. I mean, I think she's taking it very seriously, even if we would say that she fell short.
Yeah, I agree. I think, yes, of course, she's very clearly thinks this is dead serious. That's the only explanation I could come to with, again, those kind of
I mean,
terrible...
why else would she do it? She didn't do it as like
Right.
like, I think she was really like, I'm going to be a poet now, and I
Yeah.
take this very seriously.
Yeah, and I
and
think
I have a process.
there's no way you could put those photos in there seriously without taking yourself seriously
Yeah.
like that. So like it's a bad idea and it ended up terrible, but like
Like most
clearly,
photo students.
yeah. And then at the end of this, like by the time I got to the end of this book, like the all the aesthetic of it really annoyed me. Like even the cover image and the font of the cover and
Just by the
everything.
end.
Yeah. Well, before I was a little
It did not take me
confused.
long
Yeah,
to
but
get. I was instantly over that, but I'm just also, it's not that whole like 50s, 60s, like dreamy, depressed. I'm like a woman trying to fall into the arms of a man. Like it's just not
yeah.
what interests me.
Well, just that like it's been. I mean, not that like it's. Of course, it's been said before, but it's just the actual aesthetic I think that she was going for seems so unfocused and so, like I said, mindless, aimless that it just started to really grate on me towards the end.
I mean, it just
And
feels like baby's first collection of poems. That's what I'm gonna
yes,
say. Like
yeah,
that's all it is. And I didn't mean that. I know I said that in like a, fuck it, whatever. I just mean this feels very much like she just like became a poet. She just started writing and also had the opportunity to make her earliest writing, or I would assume some of her earliest serious writing, because I'm sure like, you know, we can't not call her a serious writer. She writes lyrics.
of course.
And she does, and she puts out album after album, and but it feels like for this form, this is like the first serious like collection she put together, and because she already happened to be famous, she had a way to get that collection published. Like it, and that's fine. Like I just think it feels very much like what you would expect of like a 19-year-old writing a collection of poems and thinking, I'm gonna put this out there.
Yeah.
It's just, I think for most people, this would have to be a self-published venture.
Oh yes. Oh yes. And I mean that's the reason that there is kind of a gatekeeping mechanism in place, right? It's like because most people when they're starting
But it's
out,
also
like
what
you're
distinguishes
not, yeah,
popular Instagram poetry from like literary poetry.
right. What's going to be remembered?
And those are still two relatively separate spheres, I would say. Even though perhaps they are beginning to overlap more.
I mean, literally, they're separate spheres, but the only one that matters is the Instagram one, really.
Right.
So, yeah, that's Lana's book.
It's Lana.
All right, are we done here?
I mean, can we be?
Yeah, we're done. Yeah, fuck it.
Did she do the cover art?
I don't think so. I think they credit the cover art to somebody. I think it's a more modern artist, but I think at the end here, the notes section, the cover image is an oil painting by Eric Elise Sears, copyright 2020.
I mean, someone let me know if you think this image of these dandelions after the first poem really moves you, because it didn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's American grass.
So that's it. That's Lana. We did it.
God.
All right. So, reminder to listeners, we're still looking for workshop horror stories. If you have a workshop horror story you want to share with us, send it to heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. It'll be a lot of fun. We want to get started. We also have a subscription plan. You can subscribe at patreon.com/heavyboard to receive full uncensored episodes for subscribers only, as well as bonus content. And if you don't want to do that, can't afford that, there are other ways to support us. You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. That helps us grow, helps us out. You can check out our YouTube channels. You can like, subscribe, and share. Tap the bell. That helps us out too, a free way to support us. As always, the books and everything we covered today will be linked in the description. And next episode, we are doing Faulkner's As I Lay Dying.
Yeah. Yes, we are. Fun. Well.
So this has been Heavy Board. See ya.
Hey. Bye.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom,
Heavy.
I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.